A thought can enter your mind without permission. It can arrive before you are fully awake, appear in the middle of a peaceful afternoon, or strike while someone is still speaking. It can say that you are in danger, that you have failed, that another person meant to humiliate you, or that the future has already closed its doors. The arrival is fast, the verdict feels immediate, and because the voice is inside your own head, you may assume that what it says belongs to you, but an impression is not yet a command. Between the first appearance of a thought and the life you build around it, there is a moment so small that most people never learn to see it. In that moment, the mind does something decisive. It agrees. It adds a silent yes. It treats the impression as accurate, important, urgent, or worthy of obedience. That agreement may happen in less than a second, but once repeated, it can shape an afternoon, a relationship, a career, and eventually a character. And the ancient Stoics gave unusual attention to this hidden movement of the mind. Epictetus taught that events present us with impressions, while the faculty of choice determines what we do with them. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself to remain with what the first appearance actually reported, instead of adding an unnecessary story. They were not pretending that pain was imaginary or that circumstances did not matter. They were protecting the one part of experience from which a deliberate life could still be directed. This book will call that principle the Law of Assent. The law is simple. What enters the mind does not gain full governing authority merely because it appeared. It gains authority when it is accepted, rehearsed, and permitted to organize perception and action. Every impression asks a question, even when the question is disguised as a statement. Will you agree with me? Most people answer before they know they have been asked. An email arrives without the warmth you expected. The impression says, they are losing respect for you. You assent and your body prepares for rejection. A friend takes hours to reply. The impression says, you no longer matter. You assent, and the silence becomes evidence. You make one mistake. The impression says this always happens because you are not capable. You assent, and one event becomes an identity. The external event may be real. The email may be cold. The friend may be distant. The mistake may require correction. The law of assent does not erase facts. It prevents the mind from smuggling an entire philosophy of your life inside a single fact. This is why the law is ancient and yet urgently modern. We live in an environment designed to accelerate impressions. Headlines ask for outrage before comprehension. Notifications announce importance without proving it. Edited images turn comparison into a reflex. Short fragments of information invite the mind to form total judgments about people, events, and itself. The speed of the world has increased, but the decisive inner movement remains the same. An impression arrives. Attention locks onto it. Judgment gives it meaning. Assent converts meaning into direction. If you do not understand that sequence, you may spend your life fighting the final behavior, while unknowingly approving the first interpretation that produced it. You try to stop procrastinating without examining the thought that says, effort will expose your inadequacy. You try to stop returning to the wrong relationship without examining the impression that loneliness proves unworthiness. You try to become disciplined while assenting every morning to the belief that discomfort is a reason to delay. Then you call the pattern your personality. The deepest promise of this book is not that you will control every thought. You will not. It is not that you will become invulnerable to emotion. You should not. It is not that you will create every external result through mental force. Life contains chance, illness, injustice, other people's choices, economic conditions, and limits no honest philosophy can deny. The promise is more precise and more demanding. You can learn to recognize the point at which a mental event asks to become your authority. You can examine it before signing your name beneath it. You can refuse an interpretation without refusing reality. You can feel fear without allowing fear to become prophecy. You can acknowledge anger without allowing anger to become a strategy. You can hear an old identity speaking without offering it another contract. That is the skill only a few people learn to use consistently. It is not difficult because the idea is complicated. It is difficult because impressions arrive dressed as truth. They do not introduce themselves by saying, I am one possible interpretation produced by your current state history, and limited information. They say, this is what is happening. They say, this is who you are. They say, act now. The practice begins when you learn to add one sentence. This is an impression, not yet a verdict. That sentence creates the first inch of inner territory. Within that inch, attention can widen, evidence can enter, values can speak, the body can settle enough for intelligence to return. The law is not used by shouting a better thought over a worse one. It is used by becoming a careful gatekeeper of agreement. Every chapter that follows will slow down one part of the sequence. You will see how attention selects the candidate, how judgment constructs its meaning, how assent gives it direction, and how repetition turns direction into character. You will learn why withholding assent is not suppression, why facts must be protected from fantasy in both directions, and how to use the law when pressure is high enough to make reflection feel impossible. By the end, you will have a practical method for the moment that has been ruling your life invisibly. The moment before a thought becomes your law. Chapter 1. Every impression asks for your agreement. The knock at the door. Imagine that every impression is a visitor at the door of the mind. Some knock softly, some pound. Some arrive carrying useful information. Others arrive wearing the uniform of an old fear. The mistake is not that visitors come. The mistake is assuming that a knock is the same as permission to enter, rearrange the furniture, and make decisions for the household. An impression can be sensory. A face tightens, a voice changes, a number appears on a screen. It can be emotional, a wave of dread, irritation, envy, or shame. It can be verbal. This will fail. It can be imaginal, a vivid scene of rejection that has not happened. In ordinary experience, these forms blend together so quickly that the mind perceives one solid reality. The first discipline is separation. Something appeared. That is true. What it means is still under examination. This distinction sounds modest, yet it interrupts enormous errors. If your manager says, "We need to talk," the words are the event. The tightening in your stomach is a reaction. The image of being dismissed is a forecast. The thought that you have never been secure is an interpretation. When these elements fuse, the forecast feels as factual as the sentence. The mind then begins preparing for an event it invented. You become defensive in the meeting, speak too quickly, and misread neutral questions as accusations. The original impression may have been ambiguous, but assent recruited your behavior to make the feared outcome more likely. This does not mean you should assume everything is safe. Sometimes danger is real. A wise gatekeeper does not reject every warning. The practice is to ask whether the impression is reporting, interpreting, or predicting. Reports deserve verification. Interpretations deserve comparison. Predictions deserve proportion. The visitor may be admitted, questioned, or turned away, but it should not receive the keys merely because it knocked loudly. Speed feels like certainty. Human beings often confuse the speed of a judgment with the accuracy of a judgment. A conclusion that arrives instantly can feel obvious. Yet speed frequently reveals familiarity rather than truth. The mind recognizes a pattern from the past and completes it before the present has supplied enough information. If you grew up around unpredictable anger, a quiet pause may feel threatening. If affection was inconsistent, ordinary distance may look like abandonment. If achievement brought safety, a small error may feel like social disappearance. The impression is rapid because the nervous system has practiced it, not because it has proven the case. Fast impressions have a purpose. They help us respond when delay would be dangerous. If a car crosses into your lane, immediate action matters more than philosophical analysis. But a system built for rapid protection also comments on emails, expressions, status, memory, and imagined futures. It does not always know when the emergency has ended. The law of assent does not demand slowness everywhere. It demands a better relationship with speed. When action is truly urgent, act. When the mind merely feels urgent, create enough delay to distinguish signal from conditioning. One useful question is, what becomes possible if I do not decide what this means for 10 minutes? The answer is often not passivity. It may be a calmer message, a clarifying question, a review of evidence, or simply the discovery that the first wave has changed. Delay can reveal that certainty was made of adrenaline. The first appearance and the added story. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to say no more than the first appearances reported. If someone had spoken badly of him, the report was that words had been spoken. The further conclusion that he had been damaged required another judgment. This distinction is easy to misunderstand. Reputation can affect opportunity. Slander can cause real harm. Words can wound. The point is not that consequences are unreal. The point is that the mind often adds claims that have not yet been established. Consider the statement, "She did not invite me." That may be a fact. Now notice what can attach itself within seconds. "She never respected me. Everyone else agreed I looked foolish. I will always be outside. There is no point trying with people." One missing invitation has become a biography and a prophecy. To remain with the first appearance means to preserve the boundary between what is known and what is being added. It allows you to respond firmly where necessary, without multiplying suffering through invention. Write the first appearance in one sentence that a camera could verify. Then write the added story beneath it. The camera might verify that a message has not received a reply for 6 hours. It cannot verify that the sender has become irrelevant to the other person. The camera might verify that 3 applications were rejected. It cannot verify that your future has been decided. This exercise is not cold. It is merciful. It gives pain its true dimensions instead of letting imagination make it infinite. Agreement can be emotional. Many people expect assent to sound like a formal sentence. I believe this thought is true, but agreement often appears as posture, repetition, or preparation. You may never consciously declare that a colleague is an enemy. Yet if you rehearse arguments with them each night, scan every remark for disrespect, and enter meetings prepared to defend yourself, your system has already assented. You may say that you do not believe you are inadequate, while avoiding every situation in which your ability could be tested. Behavior reveals a contract the conscious voice refuses to read. Emotional assent can also happen through identification. Instead of noticing fear is present, you conclude, "I am afraid, therefore the danger must be real." Instead of noticing shame, you conclude that shame is proof of defect. The emotion becomes evidence for the story that produced it. This creates a closed loop. The interpretation produces the emotion. The emotion is then used to validate the interpretation. Because the body feels convinced, the mind stops investigating. Breaking the loop does not require dismissing the body. It requires listening with precision. Fear may reveal uncertainty, memory, vulnerability, or actual threat. Anger may reveal a violated value, exhaustion, pride, or injustice. Emotion is data, but data must be interpreted. It is not a final court. The cost of automatic yes. Every automatic assent spends something. It may spend attention on an imagined crisis, courage on avoiding a possibility, or intimacy on defending against a wound that has not occurred. The cost is rarely visible in the moment because assent promises protection. The thought, "Do not speak, you will sound foolish," offers safety from embarrassment. Agreement costs the chance to contribute. The thought, "Check again. Something may have changed," offers relief from uncertainty. Agreement costs concentration. The thought, "Make them understand before you leave," offers the possibility of vindication. Agreement costs dignity and time. The most expensive thoughts are not always the darkest. Some sound responsible. You must think about this until you solve it. You should anticipate every problem. A good person would never disappoint anyone. These impressions recruit virtues, care, preparation, kindness, and turn them into instruments of captivity. To evaluate an impression, ask not only, "Is this true?" Ask, "What does agreeing with this repeatedly train me to become?" A thought may contain a fragment of truth while still being a destructive governor. Yes, preparation matters. But assenting to endless preparation trains avoidance. Yes, other people matter. But assenting to the demand that no one be disappointed trains self-erasure. The law is about the quality of your agreements, not the perfection of your thoughts. A thought is not a confession. Unwanted thoughts frighten people because they are interpreted as revelations of character. An aggressive image appears, and the person wonders whether it exposes a hidden desire. A selfish sentence appears, and they fear they are morally corrupt. A catastrophic possibility appears, and they treat it as intuition. Mental events can arise from memory, association, stress, fatigue, suggestion, and random combination. Their presence does not establish intention. Character is better measured by the agreements you sustain and the actions you choose. This distinction matters especially when the mind produces disturbing or intrusive content. The correct response is not moral panic. It is to recognize the event, avoid granting it symbolic importance merely because it feels strange, and seek appropriate professional support if the thoughts are persistent, distressing, or connected to risk. The Law of Assent is not a substitute for mental health care. It is a framework for understanding agency. No one should be blamed for symptoms, trauma responses, or conditions that require treatment. The practical question remains, within the support and capacity available now, what interpretation and action deserve agreement? You are not required to treat every thought as testimony about who you secretly are. The gatekeeper's first sentence, the first sentence of deliberate assent, is not a positive affirmation. It is a neutral recognition. An impression has appeared. That language reduces fusion. It does not say the impression is false. It does not say the emotion is wrong. It simply restores sequence. First there is an appearance, then there is an evaluation. Then there may be agreement. Try it with a thought that usually captures you. An impression has appeared that I am falling behind. An impression has appeared that this silence means rejection. An impression has appeared that I must answer immediately. Notice the difference between naming the impression and arguing with it. Argument keeps the thought at the center. Recognition places it within a larger field of awareness. Then add 3 questions. What did the first appearance actually report? What did my history add? What response would I respect tomorrow? The first protects facts. The second reveals conditioning. The third returns the decision to character. At the end of this chapter, the essential insight is already available. Every impression asks for agreement, but the answer does not have to be automatic. The rest of the book is the training required to make that insight usable when the knock is loud. Chapter 2. The ancient faculty that still belongs to you. What the Stoics were protecting. The Stoics lived in a world of political violence, illness, exile, loss, status, and uncertainty. Their philosophy was not built in a protected room where nothing serious happened. Epictetus was born into slavery. Marcus Aurelius governed during war and epidemic. Their insistence on inner choice was not ignorance of circumstances. It was a refusal to let circumstances occupy the whole territory of the human being. Epictetus used a concept often translated as the faculty of choice, moral purpose, or volition. No single English phrase captures it perfectly. It refers to the capacity by which a person evaluates impressions, forms intentions, and chooses a response. It is not unlimited power. It cannot cancel weather, command another person's loyalty, or prevent mortality. It is the governing use made of what appears. This is the faculty the Law of Assent trains. Ancient language can sound abstract until you place it inside an ordinary morning. You wake with heaviness. You cannot choose that first sensation. You may not know whether it comes from grief, poor sleep, hormones, illness, or dread. But the sensation is followed by an interpretation. Today will be useless. The faculty of choice begins not by manufacturing joy, but by asking whether that conclusion deserves assent. You may still need rest, you may need medical care. You may need to reduce your obligations. Inner government does not demand performance at any cost. It asks that the response be selected by reality and values rather than dictated by the first sentence pain produces. Control is not the same as ownership. People often reject philosophies of inner agency because the language of control has been abused. They have been told to control emotions, control outcomes, control perception, and control themselves as though human experience were a machine. When they cannot, they feel defective. The ancient faculty is better understood as ownership of response. Ownership does not mean you created every condition. It means you become responsible for how you handle the part that has arrived in your hands. If someone betrays you, you did not create their choice by thinking incorrectly. If a company closes, your mindset did not close it. If your body becomes ill, the diagnosis is not a moral verdict. Yet after the event, impressions will arrive. Some will help you grieve, seek support, protect yourself and act. Others will demand revenge, totalize the loss, or turn pain into permanent identity. Ownership concerns which voices will be authorized to guide the next step. This distinction protects compassion. Without it, agency becomes blame. With it, agency becomes the refusal to abandon yourself inside conditions you did not choose. The inner citadel and its misuse. Marcus Aurelius described the ruling faculty as a kind of citadel when it collects itself and chooses deliberately. The image is powerful, but it can be misused. A citadel is not a bunker in which feeling is imprisoned. It is not emotional isolation. It is the protected place from which contact with reality becomes possible without immediate surrender. If the citadel becomes a wall against intimacy, it has lost its purpose. If it becomes an excuse to tolerate abuse silently, it has become dangerous. If it teaches you to call grief weakness, it has betrayed wisdom. The true inner citadel has gates. Information enters. Love enters. Correction enters. Pain enters. What does not enter automatically is government. A criticism may cross the gate and reveal something you need to change. An insult may cross the gate and reveal only the speaker's intention. The faculty of choice examines both. Its strength is not refusal, it is discrimination. This is why humility is essential to assent. A person who rejects every uncomfortable impression is not free. They are defended. A person who accepts every uncomfortable impression is not teachable. They are unguarded. Freedom is the ability to ask, what is true here, what is mine to correct, and what does not deserve residence? 3 territories. To use the ancient faculty clearly, divide experience into 3 territories. The first territory is direct choice. It includes the words you are about to speak, the action you can take, the attention you can redirect, the question you can ask, and the interpretation you can examine. The second territory is influence. You can prepare, persuade, request, practice, invest, apologize, negotiate, and create conditions. But the outcome also depends on other people and forces. The third territory is circumstance. It includes what has already happened, another person's private judgment, the existence of uncertainty and many events no individual can command. Suffering grows when assent assigns the wrong kind of power to the wrong territory. You try to choose another person's reaction. You treat an influenceable skill as fixed circumstance. You treat a bodily symptom as something to defeat through will instead of something to investigate. You demand certainty where only preparation is available. The question is not merely, can I control this? It is, what kind of relationship do I actually have to this? Accurate classification prevents both helplessness and fantasy. The faculty weakens through disuse. The ability to examine impressions is natural, but its reliable use is trained. Every time you obey urgency without inspection, the path becomes easier to repeat. Every time you pause, name, and choose, another path becomes available. This is not because the mind is a blank surface you can program with slogans. It is because repeated attention and action create familiarity. Familiar responses require less negotiation. The person who has practiced one breath before answering an accusation does not become emotionless. They become more likely to remember the breath when accusation arrives. Training often feels unimpressive. No music plays when you decline to check a message for the 5th time. No one applauds when you correct an exaggerated thought before it becomes a spiral. But character is built in private agreements long before it appears in public decisions. The faculty also weakens under conditions that deserve respect: sleep deprivation, chronic stress, trauma activation, hunger, intoxication, illness, and overload. Philosophy should not pretend physiology is irrelevant. If your capacity collapses every evening, the solution may include food, rest, boundaries, treatment, or a less punishing schedule. Protecting the governing faculty includes protecting the body through which it operates. Freedom is a quality of participation. Absolute independence is impossible. We are affected by bodies, families, economies, cultures, losses, and love. The Stoic ambition was not to become untouched. It was to participate without surrendering moral purpose. This reframes freedom. Freedom is not the absence of influence. It is the quality of your participation in influence. An advertisement can attract your attention. It does not have to determine your purchase. A parent's voice may live in your memory. It does not have to write today's standard. An emotion can alter your body. It does not have to dictate your behavior. A crowd can create pressure. It does not have to receive your conscience. You will never become a sealed system. The aim is to remain a participant who can still answer. When you understand this, the phrase "my own mind" changes meaning. It does not mean every content inside the mind expresses your deepest self. It means the responsibility for selection, examination, and action increasingly returns to you. The difference between power and performance. Some people turn inner work into a performance of invulnerability. They speak calmly while resentment grows beneath the voice. They claim not to care while organizing their lives around proving others wrong. They use philosophical language to avoid grief. That is not government, it is public relations. The ancient faculty is measured by coherence, not appearance. You may cry and still refuse a destructive conclusion. You may tremble and still tell the truth. You may feel anger and still choose proportion. You may need help and still exercise agency by asking for it. Power is the capacity to remain in relationship with reality while choosing the next honorable action. Performance is the attempt to look unaffected. The law of assent becomes cruel when used to judge visible emotion. Its purpose is not to make you resemble a statue. Its purpose is to prevent the most activated part of you from making every decision. The question Epictetus leaves with you. The central ancient question is not, "What do I feel?" nor "What happened?" Both matter. The deeper question is, "What use will I make of what has appeared?" Two people can receive similar criticism. One assents to humiliation and retaliates. Another assents to total self-condemnation and disappears. A third examines the criticism, corrects what is true, rejects what is distorted, and changes without collapsing. The event is not irrelevant, but the use differs. The same person can make different use of the same impression on different days. That is hopeful. It means the pattern is not essence, it is practice under conditions. When an impression arrives today, ask, what faculty is being requested right now? Courage, patience, precision, a boundary, a question, rest, an apology, refusal. This moves the mind from verdict to function. Instead of deciding what the event proves about your worth, you decide what quality the event calls you to embody. The ancient faculty still belongs to you whenever you can make that move. Chapter 3. Attention brings the impression to the gate. The first vote. Before the mind assents to an impression, attention often casts the first vote. What receives attention gains clarity, emotional weight, and access to memory. It begins recruiting supporting evidence. Suppose you enter a room believing you are not welcome. Attention searches faces for confirmation. It notices the person who did not greet you and misses the one who made space. It magnifies a distracted expression and ignores a warm question. By the end of the evening, you possess a collection of evidence selected by the very belief you were trying to test. Attention is not neutral light. It is a limited resource with a direction. This does not mean you can solve life by looking only at pleasant things. Selective optimism can be as misleading as selective fear. The discipline is broader attention, enough space to include information that the first impression would exclude. When the mind says no one values my work, ask it to produce the complete field. Who has responded? What has improved? What criticism is specific? What support has been overlooked? What remains genuinely unsatisfactory? The goal is not a favorable verdict. It is a fuller record. Salience is not importance. The loudest thing in awareness feels important, but salience and importance are not identical. A notification is salient because it flashes. A cruel remark is salient because threat systems remember it. A dramatic possibility is salient because imagination gives it color. Quiet evidence often loses the competition. One hostile comment beneath a video can occupy more attention than hundreds of people who watched with appreciation. One awkward minute can dominate a 2-hour conversation. One market decline can erase awareness of a long-term plan. The mind is not necessarily lying, it is waiting. The law of assent requires an audit of weight. Ask, how much of my conclusion comes from the importance of this event, and how much comes from its vividness? You can respect a vivid event without allowing it to represent the whole. A criticism may matter. It does not automatically define the quality of your work. A rejection may hurt. It does not automatically measure your future. A symptom may require attention. It does not automatically establish the worst diagnosis your search results can produce. Maturity is the ability to keep a striking detail in proportion to the field that contains it. The economy built around your attention. Modern platforms compete for the same gate the ancient philosophers tried to protect. Their systems learn which impressions reliably make you pause, return, click, and react. Outrage holds attention. Fear increases checking. Comparison creates restless scanning. Certainty spreads faster than nuance. The system does not need a personal intention against you. It only needs a measurable preference for engagement. If your nervous system repeatedly responds to a type of content, more of that content can be placed before you. Attention selects an impression, and the environment supplies another. This creates an externalized loop of assent. You click because the impression feels important. Repetition makes the theme feel common. Commonness makes it feel true. Truth-feeling produces more clicks. The solution is not to blame technology for every inner state. It is to stop treating exposure as evidence. What appears frequently in a feed may reveal what a system predicts will hold you, not what deserves the largest place in your understanding of reality. Curate inputs as seriously as you curate food. Remove sources that repeatedly profit from making you less precise. Create friction before impulsive checking. Enter platforms with a purpose and an exit condition. Attention management is not a productivity trick. It is border policy for the mind. If this work is helping you recover that border, subscribe and continue with us. The purpose here is not to fill your attention, but to help you govern what receives it. Attention creates apparent evidence. Once attention locks onto an impression, memory becomes a supporting attorney. If the impression is "I always ruin opportunities," the mind retrieves the interview that went badly, the conversation you mishandled, and the project you delayed. Events that contradict the claim do not arrive with equal speed. This is why a mood can feel like a historian. Sadness produces a biography of loss. Anxiety produces an archive of threat. Anger produces a catalogue of offenses. The archive contains real events, but its selection is state-dependent. Do not argue that none of the memories are true. Ask what the current state has excluded. Create 2 columns mentally. In the first, place evidence the impression selected. In the second, place relevant evidence it omitted. If you have failed, also remember where you adapted. If someone has disappointed you, also examine the full pattern rather than one idealized or demonized version. If risk exists, include both the probability and your resources. Balanced attention is not indecision. It is the foundation of a verdict you can trust. The spotlight and the stage. Attention behaves like a spotlight on a stage. Whatever it illuminates becomes vivid, while the unlit stage does not disappear. A painful thought under the light may feel like the entire mind. A present failure may feel like the entire life. The simplest way to loosen this illusion is to widen sensory contact. Feel your feet. Hear the farthest sound. Notice the temperature of the air. Name 3 objects. This is not an escape from the issue. It reminds the nervous system that the issue exists inside a larger present. Then, widen the time frame. How will this matter in a week, a year, or 10 years? Temporal distance does not make every problem small. Some events become more serious when viewed long-term. But distance changes scale. It prevents the current emotion from being the only unit of measurement. Finally, widen identity. You are the person facing this problem, but you are not only this problem. You are also relationships, commitments, capacities, unfinished growth, and previous survival. The impression wants exclusive lighting. Deliberate attention restores the stage. What you practice seeing. Attention becomes skilled at what it repeatedly searches for. Search for insult, and you become efficient at detecting possible insult. Search for proof of inadequacy, and the mind supplies it rapidly. Search for the next controllable action, and another faculty develops. This is not a command to ignore warning signs. It is a call to diversify the search. In a difficult situation, train attention to locate 4 things: the fact, the feeling, the value, and the next action. The fact protects reality. The feeling protects humanity. The value protects direction. The action protects agency. For example, the proposal was rejected. I feel disappointed and embarrassed. I value meaningful work and financial stability. My next action is to request specific feedback and revise the first page tomorrow. Notice what is absent: a total verdict about the self. The event receives attention, but not a throne. The attention fast. If one impression has dominated your mind, conduct a 24-hour attention fast from reinforcement. Do not search for more evidence, revisit the message, inspect the person's profile, retell the story to another listener, or rehearse the same prediction. You are not forbidding the thought, you are declining to feed its claim to importance. Use the recovered attention on concrete life. Clean a space, finish a task, walk, sleep, speak with someone about another subject, or study the actual problem at a planned time. The fast is successful not when the thought disappears, but when it no longer determines every investment of attention. At the end, ask what changed. Did urgency decrease? Did additional facts appear? Did the same thought return with different language? Did the body settle once reinforcement stopped? Attention brought the impression to the gate. Attention can also stop announcing it as the only visitor who matters. Chapter 4. Judgment gives the event its meaning. The invisible sentence. An event rarely reaches emotion without passing through an invisible sentence. The sentence may be so fast that you feel only the emotion, but some form of judgment has usually occurred. This is dangerous. This is unfair. This proves I am unwanted. This should not be happening. This opportunity must not be lost. Judgment is not inherently a mistake. To live is to evaluate. You must distinguish safe from unsafe, honest from deceptive, valuable from trivial. The problem begins when judgment operates invisibly and then presents its result as the event itself. Two people wait outside the same office before a difficult conversation. One interprets the meeting as a test of worth. The other interprets it as an exchange of information with consequences. Both may feel tension, but the meaning organizes the tension differently. The first enters to defend an identity. The second enters to learn, state a position, and respond. The Law of Assent does not say that you can choose any meaning without regard for facts. It says that meaning is constructed and therefore deserves examination. Ask, what invisible sentence stands between this event and my reaction? Do not search for a sophisticated answer. It is often blunt. If this happens, I am finished. If they disagree, I do not matter. If I rest, I am lazy. Once the sentence becomes visible, it can finally be tested. Description, evaluation, and identity. Judgments become more dangerous as they climb from description to evaluation to identity. Description says, I missed the deadline. Evaluation says, that was irresponsible. Identity says, I am an irresponsible person who cannot be trusted. Description gives you a fact. Evaluation may give you a standard. Identity turns an event into a permanent self. Sometimes identity language is appropriate in a limited sense. Patterns matter. If you repeatedly break promises, it is not enough to call each event isolated. But even then, useful language remains specific. I have practiced unreliability in this area, and I need to repair the pattern. That sentence holds responsibility and possibility together. Global identity judgments feel powerful because they close the case. They replace the difficult work of change with the certainty of condemnation. If you are simply defective, no precise repair is required. Shame can then masquerade as honesty. Whenever the mind uses always, never, everyone, no one, or a permanent label, examine whether a behavioral description would be more accurate. Precision reduces drama, but increases responsibility. I avoided this conversation 3 times gives you something to address. I am a coward gives you an identity to defend or hate. The rule beneath the reaction. Strong judgments often reveal hidden rules. People should recognize effort without being told. A partner should know what I need. Success should arrive in proportion to sacrifice. If I am kind, others should be fair. These rules are understandable. Some express worthy expectations. But when treated as laws of reality, they create repeated shock. The world does not sign our private contracts. A hidden rule can be converted into a value and a request. I value recognition, so I will communicate my contribution. I value attentiveness, so I will state my need and observe the response. I value fairness, so I will negotiate, document, and set boundaries. This shift is important. A rule demands that reality obey before you can act. A value directs your action inside the reality that exists. When an impression creates disproportionate anger or despair, ask, what rule did I believe was guaranteed? The answer may expose an assumption that has been governing you for years. You do not have to abandon standards. You have to stop confusing standards with guarantees. Pain in the second wound. Pain is the first wound. Judgment can create a second. The first wound may be rejection, loss, illness, failure, betrayal, or uncertainty. The second wound says, this should not affect me. I am weak for hurting. My life is now permanently less. I will never trust again. The existence of this pain proves that I chose everything wrong. The second wound often feels like analysis, but it is resistance mixed with identity. It places pain inside a story that makes it larger and more enduring. Do not use this distinction to minimize the first wound. Some events require grief, legal action, protection, treatment, and time. The law of assent is not a demand to reinterpret cruelty as kindness. It is permission to refuse unnecessary additions. You can say, this loss is real, and I will not use it as evidence that love was a mistake. You can say, this injustice happened, and I will pursue the response available without allowing it to define every human being. You can say, I am afraid, and fear does not know the entire future. The second wound is not removed once. It is declined whenever the mind tries to turn pain into a total philosophy. Reappraisal is not decoration. Modern psychology uses the term cognitive reappraisal for changing the way a situation is interpreted in order to alter its emotional impact. The useful form of reappraisal is not decorative optimism. It is a more accurate or functional reading of the same event. Suppose a presentation produces anxiety. Decoration says, everyone will love me. That claim is unearned and fragile. Reappraisal says, my body is preparing for something important. I do not need to eliminate activation. I need to use it to speak clearly. Suppose a relationship ends. Decoration says, this is the best thing that ever happened. You may not believe it. Reappraisal says this ending contains pain and information. I can grieve what was real while allowing the future to remain unknown. Good reappraisal preserves evidence. It changes the frame without falsifying the picture. Research on emotion regulation has found that interpretation is one point at which emotional responses can be influenced. But no technique works identically in every context, and no study turns grief into a switch. The practical principle is modest. If judgment helps generate an emotional response, a more accurate judgment can change the response's shape, intensity, or behavioral consequences. The meaning test. Before granting assent to a meaning, apply 4 tests. First, the evidence test. What supports this meaning, and what relevant evidence challenges it? Second, the scale test. Am I turning one event into a statement about everything? Third, the function test. What behavior does this meaning invite? Fourth, the character test. If I practice this meaning for a year, who will I become? A meaning can pass the evidence test and fail the function test. Perhaps someone truly underestimated you. The meaning I must make them regret it may fit the emotional facts, but organize your life around their gaze. So a stronger meaning is, their judgment has consequences I will address, but it will not become the audience for my future. The character test is especially powerful. A judgment is not only a description of the present. When repeated, it is training for the future. The sentence that leaves room. Rigid judgments close reality too early. Deliberate judgment leaves room for revision. Replace this means with one possible meaning is, replace I know why they did it with. The behavior is clear, the motive is not fully known. Replace this will happen with, this is one risk and here is how I will prepare. These phrases are not weak. They are intellectually honest. They prevent confidence from exceeding evidence. The mind may protest that uncertainty feels unsafe. Certainty can feel like ground, even when it is false. But false certainty directs action badly. The courage to leave room is the courage to remain teachable. An event needs meaning before it can guide response. Give it a meaning strong enough to respect facts and flexible enough to survive new information. Chapter 5. Assent turns meaning into direction. The silent signature. Assent is the silent signature beneath a judgment. It is the moment the mind moves from "this has appeared" to "this is how things are." The signature may be conscious, but most often it is expressed through continued attention, emotional investment, and behavior. If you assent to "I must answer now," your hand reaches for the phone. If you assent to "discomfort" means stop. Avoidance feels reasonable. If you assent to "their approval determines whether the work is valuable," creativity bends toward applause. Direction follows agreement. This is why merely replacing negative words with positive words often fails. The old judgment still organizes behavior. A person repeats "I am confident," while assenting more deeply to "any visible uncertainty will expose me." The body obeys the deeper contract. To change direction, find the sentence behavior is already serving. Ask of any recurring pattern, "What must I be treating as true for this behavior to make sense?" Procrastination may serve the belief that imperfect effort is dangerous. People-pleasing may serve the belief that disagreement equals abandonment. Compulsive checking may serve the belief that certainty can be achieved through one more look. Behavior is often rational inside an unexamined judgment. Assent has degrees. Agreement is not always absolute. You can treat a possibility as certain, probable, plausible, or merely imaginable. Emotional suffering often increases when the mind promotes a possibility several levels above its evidence. "I could fail" becomes "I will fail." They may be disappointed becomes "they will reject me." This symptom needs evaluation becomes "this symptom proves catastrophe." The correction is not to demote every danger to nothing. It is to assign the proper level of confidence. Try using probability language. "This outcome is possible but not established. There are signs of a problem and I need more information. I have made this mistake before, but repetition is not inevitability." Calibrated assent preserves both readiness and sanity. You can prepare for a risk without living as if the risk has already become reality. Provisional agreement. Some decisions must be made before certainty is available. In those moments, use provisional assent. Provisional assent says, "Based on current evidence, I will act on this interpretation while remaining willing to revise it." Scientists use versions of this discipline. Good leaders use it. Healthy relationships require it. You may decide that a pattern is unsafe and create distance even if you cannot prove another person's motive. You are not required to wait for total certainty before protecting yourself. The interpretation can remain provisional while the boundary is firm. You may accept a job believing it offers growth, then revise when the culture reveals itself. You may trust a person gradually while continuing to observe consistency. You may pursue a plan without declaring it your only possible future. Provisional assent prevents two extremes: paralysis until certainty and blind loyalty after commitment. It allows action without worshipping the first decision. Consent under pressure. Pressure changes the quality of assent. Fatigue makes relief persuasive. Fear makes certainty persuasive. Loneliness makes familiar pain persuasive. Social pressure makes belonging persuasive. This is why important agreements should be examined under more than one state when possible. A decision made at midnight may deserve morning review. A message written in anger may deserve 1 hour unsent. A purchase made in urgency may deserve 24 hours. A promise made from loneliness may deserve a conversation with a trusted person. State is not destiny, but it is context. Create personal rules for high-pressure assent. Do not make irreversible decisions while highly activated unless safety requires it. Do not send the longest message during the strongest emotion. Do not interpret silence after midnight. Do not negotiate against yourself merely to end discomfort. These rules are not restrictions on freedom. They protect freedom from temporary states that want permanent authority. Borrowed assent. Many judgments enter the mind already carrying social approval. A family repeats that security matters more than vocation. A culture repeats that visibility equals value. A group repeats that doubt is betrayal. Because the belief is shared, assent feels like belonging. Borrowed assent is difficult to recognize because it speaks in the plural. People like us do not do that. Everyone knows what success looks like. A good daughter would agree. A serious man would never admit fear. The question is not whether inherited beliefs are wrong. Some contain wisdom earned across generations. The question is whether you have examined them or merely received them. Name the source of a governing sentence. Who first taught you that rest must be earned? Whose approval is imagined when you evaluate your life? What community benefits if you never question the standard? You can honor people without outsourcing conscience. Gratitude does not require permanent assent. Moral assent. The deepest agreements are moral. They concern what you will consider good, honorable, shameful, or worth pursuing. These judgments shape every lesser decision. If you assent to the idea that status is the highest good, humiliation becomes unbearable and compromise becomes easy. If comfort is the highest good, difficulty becomes evidence that the path is wrong. If integrity is a governing good, discomfort can be tolerated when it serves truth. The Stoics placed character at the center because external goods are unstable. This does not mean money, health, reputation, and relationships do not matter. It means they cannot safely serve as the final measure of a person. They are conditions to navigate, protect, enjoy, and sometimes lose. Character determines how they are used. Ask, what good is this impression asking me to worship? The thought, you must win this argument, may be placing superiority above truth. The thought, do not risk rejection, may be placing comfort above honest connection. The thought, work until you collapse, may be placing recognition above life. Assent always points towards some conception of the good, even when hidden. The refusal that creates direction. Withholding assent is not emptiness. It creates space for another direction. If you refuse, I am too anxious to begin, you still need an action. The useful replacement is not, I am fearless. It is, anxiety is present, and I can begin for 5 minutes. If you refuse, their disrespect means I must explode. The alternative is not passivity. It may be I will state the boundary once and document what happens next. If you refuse, this mistake defines me. The alternative is I will repair the consequence, study the pattern, and practice a different response. Refusal becomes power when joined to direction. Otherwise, the mind returns to the old judgment because at least it knew what to do. Every disciplined assent should end with a verb. Ask, wait, verify, leave, rest, repair, practice, decline, document, begin. The ancient law becomes visible in action. A thought loses government not when you defeat it in debate, but when your next behavior stops serving it. Chapter 6. Repetition converts direction into character. The vote you cast again. One assent rarely determines a life. Repeated assent does. Every time you treat discomfort as danger, avoidance receives another vote. Every time you treat another person's mood as your responsibility, self-abandonment receives another vote. Every time you return attention to the chosen task, despite an anxious impression, steadiness receives another vote. Character can be understood as a history of practiced agreements embodied in action. This does not reduce personality to choice. Temperament, biology, culture, and experience matter. But within those conditions, repetition gives certain responses greater accessibility. James Allen wrote about the relationship between thought and character in a moral language typical of his time. The useful insight is not that people deserve every circumstance they face. They do not. The useful insight is that repeated inner patterns participate in the kind of agent we become. You are not only thinking a thought. When you obey it repeatedly, you are rehearsing a self. Familiarity pretends to be identity. An old response often says, "This is just who I am." What it may mean is, "This is the path my system knows best." Familiarity has emotional authority. A person raised in chaos may find calm suspicious. Someone trained to overperform may experience rest as guilt. A person who has defended themselves for years may feel exposed when they stop explaining. The discomfort of a new response is not proof that it is false. It may be the sensation of unfamiliarity. When you practice deliberate assent, expect an identity lag. Your behavior can change before your self-image catches up. You may set a boundary and still feel like someone who cannot set boundaries. You may complete the task and still hear the old prediction. Do not wait for the internal narration to update before continuing. Identity often follows evidence more slowly than action creates it. The reinforcement hidden in relief. Many destructive agreements survive because they produce immediate relief. You avoid the call and anxiety drops. You check the message and uncertainty pauses. You apologize for a need and conflict recedes. Relief teaches the nervous system that the behavior protected you. The long-term cost arrives later, so it is a weaker teacher. Avoidance increases fear. Checking increases dependence on checking. Self-erasure increases resentment. Yet in the moment, the system remembers relief. To change the pattern, you must become willing to pay a small amount of immediate discomfort to avoid a larger future captivity. This is the emotional price of new assent. You decide, uncertainty is uncomfortable, not automatically dangerous, and refrain from checking. The body protests. You decide, disagreement can coexist with connection, and state the preference. Anxiety rises. The practice succeeds not because discomfort disappears, but because you remain while it changes, without performing the old behavior. Relief is not always evidence of wisdom. Sometimes it is the reward that keeps a prison operating. Small agreements build large standards. Grand declarations attract attention, but standards are built through ordinary moments. The promise to transform your life matters less than the agreement made when the alarm sounds, the criticism arrives, or the first excitement fades. Suppose you want to become reliable. The governing assent is not "I am a reliable person" repeated abstractly. It is "this small promise counts even though no one is watching." Repetition converts the sentence into evidence. Suppose you want self-respect. The governing assent may be "my no does not require a courtroom." Each concise refusal strengthens the standard. Suppose you want courage. The assent may be "fear can accompany the action." Each attempt teaches the mind that courage was never the absence of activation. Choose a standard small enough to practice daily and important enough to shape character. The law works through accumulation. Relapse is also an impression. When an old pattern returns, the mind produces a second impression. Nothing changed. If you assent to that judgment, one lapse becomes abandonment. Treat relapse as data. What state were you in? What trigger arrived? What judgment regained authority? What support or preparation was missing? The event can improve the practice if it is not converted into identity. Progress is not the disappearance of old impressions. It is often the shortening of obedience. A spiral lasts 20 minutes instead of 2 days. A reactive message is drafted but not sent. A boundary is restored after one compromise rather than after a year. The perfection standard is one of the most seductive impressions in change. It says that a real transformation would eliminate difficulty. The better standard is recovery. How accurately and quickly can you return? The environment repeats with you. Repetition is not purely internal. Environments cue agreements. A phone beside the bed invites checking. A chaotic workspace supports delay. A social group rewards contempt. A calendar without rest makes urgent interpretations more persuasive. Design is a form of assent made in advance. Place the book where you intend to read. Remove the application that converts boredom into hours of comparison. Prepare the sentence you will use when a boundary is tested. Schedule reflection before the crisis. Tell one trusted person what you are practicing. You are not weak for using structure. You are intelligent enough to know that choice operates within conditions. The ancient philosophers practiced reminders, review, and deliberate preparation because principles disappear under pressure unless given form. The evening review. At the end of the day, review 3 moments without prosecution. Where did I assent automatically? Where did I pause and choose? What impression is likely to return tomorrow? For the first, identify the hidden judgment. For the second, record the evidence of capacity. For the third, prepare one sentence and one action. If the likely impression is, "You are too tired to begin," the sentence may be, "Fatigue changes the size of the step, not the existence of the step." The action may be opening the document and working for 10 minutes. The review should be brief. Its purpose is training, not rumination. End with the next practice and release the case. Character grows when repetition becomes conscious enough to be directed. The person you become is not created by one heroic moment. It is shaped by the agreements you renew when no one is listening. Chapter 7. Withhold assent without suppressing the mind. The difference between no and not yet. When an unwanted thought appears, many people try to force it out. They tighten against it, repeat the opposite, distract themselves urgently, or demand silence. The thought may leave for a moment, but the mind has already received a message. This content is dangerous. Monitor for its return. Withholding assent is different from suppression. Suppression says you must not be here. Withholding assent says you may be here, but I have not decided that you are true, important, or actionable. The difference is the space between no and not yet. You do not have to defeat the thought. You can postpone judgment until the body settles, evidence arrives, or a planned reflection period begins. Not yet prevents urgency from becoming authority. Imagine a thought saying, "You are going to lose everything." Suppression begins a wrestling match. Deliberate withholding responds, a catastrophic prediction has appeared. I will review the actual risk at 3 o'clock with the numbers in front of me. Until then, I am returning to the current task. The thought may continue speaking. Success is not silence, success is non-promotion. Why fighting can strengthen the thought. To make sure you are not thinking about something, the mind must keep checking whether it is present. That monitoring can keep the target accessible. Classic thought suppression research made this paradox famous through the instruction not to think of a white bear. Later research has shown that the effects are more nuanced than a single slogan suggests. Context, cognitive load, the type of thought, and the method matter. The practical lesson remains. Aggressive mental control can become another form of attention. If you spend an hour proving that a thought is false, the thought still occupies the center of the hour. If you repeat a positive statement with panic, the panic teaches the mind that the negative possibility must be powerful. Try changing the task. Instead of removing the thought, reduce its behavioral influence. Let it exist at the edge of awareness while you complete one chosen action. This teaches a different relationship. Presence without obedience. The thought says, check. You breathe and wait 5 minutes. The thought says, explain yourself again. You keep the message unsent. The thought says you cannot work while anxious. You work for one small interval with anxiety beside you. Authority declines when commands repeatedly fail to recruit behavior. Name the process, not the prophecy. Language can create distance. Instead of saying, I am going to fail, say, my mind is predicting failure. Instead of, they do not respect me, say, I am interpreting this behavior as disrespect. Instead of, I cannot handle this, say, a capacity judgment has appeared while I am activated. This is not a trick to make words harmless. It is accurate grammar. A prediction is an event occurring in the mind. It is not the future arriving early. Modern approaches sometimes call this cognitive diffusion or decentering, learning to experience thoughts as mental events rather than literal descriptions that must govern behavior. The ancient language of impressions and assent points toward a related practical distinction. The traditions are not identical, but they converge on one useful skill, seeing content without becoming identical to content. Choose labels that are simple enough to remember under pressure. Predicting, mind-reading, totalizing, comparing, prosecuting, rehearsing, catastrophizing. A label should reveal the process without becoming another accusation. Say, the mind is rehearsing rejection, not I am ridiculous for overthinking again. The first creates observation. The second adds shame and demands another round of defense. Put the feeling into words. Thought and emotion often arrive fused. You can loosen them by naming the feeling with moderate precision. This is disappointment with fear underneath. This is anger mixed with embarrassment. This is grief. Not a problem I can solve tonight. Research on affect labeling suggests that putting feelings into words can alter emotional responding, though effects vary with context and intensity. The practical value is immediate. A named state becomes information. An unnamed state tends to become atmosphere. Avoid dramatic labels that amplify the event. I am destroyed is not an emotion label. It is a total judgment. I feel hurt, exposed, and uncertain is more precise. Then locate the feeling in the body, tightness in the chest, heat in the face, pressure behind the eyes, restlessness in the hands. This step prevents the mind from turning bodily activation into endless explanation. Sometimes the body needs breathing, movement, water. food, sleep, or safe company, more than another interpretation. Naming does not solve the event. It stops the event from using unnamed intensity as proof. The 90-second non-agreement. When a strong impression arrives, practice 90 seconds of non-agreement. For the first 30 seconds, do nothing irreversible. Do not send, purchase, quit, accuse, confess, or promise. Let the body complete the first surge without adding action. For the next 30 seconds, name 3 layers. The fact is, and the feeling is, the prediction is. For the final 30 seconds, choose the next reversible action. Save the draft, ask for time, take notes, step outside, schedule the conversation, verify the number, drink water, return in 10 minutes. 90 seconds will not resolve every crisis. Its purpose is narrower. Protect the gate while intensity is highest. In a genuine emergency, safety comes first. Call for help, leave danger, follow medical guidance, or act. The pause is for psychological urgency, not a rule that delays necessary protection. The guest chair. Visualize the thought sitting in a guest chair across from you. It can speak, but it does not sit behind your desk. Ask it 3 questions. What are you trying to protect me from? What evidence are you using? What do you want me to do right now? An anxious thought may answer, I am trying to protect you from being surprised. I am using the last time you were rejected. I want you to withdraw before anyone can decide. Now you can appreciate the protective intention without accepting the strategy. Thank you for trying to prevent pain. Withdrawal would also prevent information and connection. I will proceed carefully instead. This form of inner dialogue is not required for everyone, but it reveals an important truth. Many punishing thoughts are failed protectors. They use old maps and extreme methods. Hatred toward them can intensify internal conflict. Respectful refusal can be stronger. Allowing is not indulging. Allowing a thought to exist does not mean giving it unlimited time. A visitor can be acknowledged without receiving the entire day. Create a container. If a concern deserves analysis, schedule 15 minutes. Write the question at the top of a page. Separate known facts, unknowns, available actions, and the next review point. When the time ends, choose an output. If no output exists, further thinking may be repetition rather than problem-solving. This distinction protects against using acceptance language to indulge rumination. I am allowing my thoughts can become permission to revisit the same courtroom for hours. Genuine allowing reduces struggle while maintaining direction. The output test is simple. After reflection, do you have a decision, question, action, boundary, or accepted uncertainty? If not, close the session and return later, only if new information appears. The thought you should believe. Not every difficult thought should be withheld. Some are accurate and necessary. You have been avoiding this. Your behavior hurts someone. The numbers do not support the plan. This relationship is unsafe. The Law of Assent is not a system for escaping unwelcome truth. It is a system for giving truth a clean hearing. An accurate thought tends to become more specific under examination. It points toward evidence and proportionate action. Shame-based distortion becomes more global. It attacks identity and offers punishment instead of repair. Compare. I lied in that conversation because I feared the consequence. I need to correct the record and understand the pattern. That is painful and actionable. I am a fraud in every part of life is totalizing and strangely vague. Believe what survives examination, not what hurts most. Pain is not the same as truth, and comfort is not the same as falsehood. When the mind demands certainty, some impressions cannot be resolved because the information does not exist yet. Will the relationship last? Will the treatment work? Will the business succeed? Will the person forgive you? The mind treats uncertainty as an unfinished task and keeps producing scenarios. Withholding assent here means refusing both catastrophe and guarantee. Use a double sentence. I do not know what will happen. I know what I will do next. The first sentence respects uncertainty. The second protects agency. You may not know whether the application will be accepted. You know you will submit the strongest version by Friday and continue applying elsewhere. You may not know whether trust will be restored. You know the boundaries and evidence required before increasing closeness. You may not know what a symptom means. You know you will contact a qualified professional rather than search until fear becomes certainty. Uncertainty is not an impression to eliminate. It is a condition in which disciplined assent becomes visible. The three forms of release. An impression can be released in three ways. The first is disproval. Evidence shows the judgment was inaccurate. The second is completion. The concern produces an action, and further thought is unnecessary until results arrive. The third is coexistence. The uncertainty cannot be solved, but life continues alongside it. Many people wait for disproval when only coexistence is available. They want proof that no rejection, illness, loss, or failure will happen. Because proof cannot be supplied, the mind keeps the case open. Coexistence is not resignation. It is the refusal to postpone living until uncertainty signs a peace treaty. Withhold assent gently. Let the impression remain an impression until evidence, values, and deliberate choice determine what it deserves. Chapter 8. Use the law when pressure is highest. Philosophy in the red zone. A principle is easiest to admire when nothing important is being threatened. The real test begins when the body enters the red zone, heart accelerating, face hot, attention narrowing, language becoming absolute. In that state, do not demand complex wisdom. Use a short sequence, pause the irreversible, reduce the sentence, protect the next action. Pause the irreversible means delay what cannot be easily repaired. Reduce the sentence means describe the event without biography or prophecy. Protect the next action means select the smallest behavior aligned with safety and character. You do not need to solve your identity during a confrontation. You need to avoid giving a temporary state permanent consequences. When someone provokes you, provocation tries to control assent by controlling tempo. A person insults, interrupts, accuses, or distorts. The impression says, if you do not answer now, they win. That judgment places your self-respect inside their timing. The first act of freedom is to reject the clock. You can say, I am not continuing this conversation in this form. You can ask, what specific outcome are you requesting? You can leave, document, or return later. Notice that withholding assent does not require passivity. The boundary may be immediate. What is withheld is the interpretation that reaction equals strength. Provocateurs often depend on predictable agreements, that dignity requires the last word, that silence proves weakness, that accusation requires a full defense. Once those agreements are unavailable, their control decreases. The aim is not to appear calm. The aim is to prevent another person's dysregulation from selecting your character. When criticism arrives, criticism triggers two opposite automatic assents. One says, they are right about everything, I have been exposed. The other says, they are wrong about everything, I am being attacked. Both protect the ego from careful discrimination. Use the three-part filter. Content. What specific claim is being made? Evidence. What examples support it? Source. What access, competence, and incentive does this person have? A hostile source can still identify a true problem. A loving source can still be mistaken. Separate delivery from content long enough to evaluate both. If the criticism is accurate, assent to the correction without assenting to humiliation. If it is inaccurate, reject it without constructing a campaign of revenge. If it is mixed, extract the useful part and leave the distortion. The mature response is often emotionally unsatisfying because it does not offer total innocence or total guilt. It offers truth. When rejection feels like erasure, rejection can activate ancient social pain. The mind may treat one person's no as a verdict from the entire human world. It begins revising the past. They never cared. I was foolish. No one will choose me. Return to scale. Who rejected what? Under which conditions? At what time? A company rejected an application, not your total capacity. A person declined a relationship, not your right to be loved. An audience ignored one piece of work, not every future contribution. Then protect dignity through action. Do not beg for a verdict the other person cannot provide. Request useful feedback where appropriate. Grieve. Revise. Leave the door that is actually closed. Continue building doors that remain possible. Rejection hurts because desire was real. You do not need to pretend otherwise, but pain should not receive authority to define the whole self. When fear predicts disaster, fear is skilled at converting possibility into presence. It shows the body an image, and the body responds as though the image were news. Ask fear to separate hazard, probability, exposure, and response. Hazard, what could happen? Probability, how likely is it based on available evidence? Exposure, what would make the outcome more or less consequential? Response, what preparation is reasonable now? This structure turns fear into risk assessment. It may reveal that the danger deserves serious action. It may also reveal that repeated imagining has been mistaken for increasing probability. Once reasonable preparation is complete, continuing to rehearse the disaster does not necessarily increase readiness. It may only train the body to inhabit an event that has not occurred. When anger claims moral authority, anger often arrives with the conviction that it alone sees clearly. It identifies violation and supplies energy. That can be valuable, but anger also simplifies motive, exaggerates certainty, and discounts future cost. Do not ask anger to disappear before you act. Ask it to provide information without drafting the entire strategy. What value was violated? What fact needs verification? What boundary is required? What consequence is proportionate? What action would still look honorable after the intensity falls? Anger may say, destroy the relationship. The value may say, do not accept contempt. The boundary may be distance, documentation, or a direct statement. Sometimes ending the relationship is correct. The difference is that the decision is made from the full record, not from the loudest minute. When shame says hide. Shame is an identity verdict delivered in the voice of exposure. It says that a failure is not something you did, but something you are, and that being seen would make repair impossible. Withhold assent from global condemnation while accepting specific responsibility. Name the action. Name the consequence. Name the person affected. Name the repair. Name the safeguard against repetition. Shame hates specificity because specificity transforms a sentence into work. I am terrible can repeat forever. I broke this agreement, caused this cost, and will take these 4 corrective actions, has a path. If the shame concerns abuse committed against you, the assignment is different. Responsibility belongs to the person who chose the harm. The impression that you caused or deserved it should not be granted moral authority. Support from a qualified professional or trusted advocate may be necessary to disentangle survival responses from blame. When desire says now, not all dangerous impressions are painful. Desire can produce its own urgency. Buy it now. Send the message now. Take the opportunity before anyone else does. Break the promise just once. The emotional signature is compression. Alternatives disappear. Delay feels like loss. Create a waiting rule based on consequence. 10 minutes for a minor impulse. 24 hours for a meaningful purchase. Several days and outside counsel for a decision that changes money, work, health, or relationship commitments. During the waiting period, do not spend the entire time fantasizing. Examine total cost, opportunity cost, reversibility, and alignment with long-term values. Desire is allowed to make a proposal. It is not allowed to set the deadline unilaterally. When the crowd decides first. Social assent is contagious. In a crowd, emotional certainty spreads faster than evidence. People repeat a claim because repetition signals belonging. Doubt begins to feel like disloyalty. When everyone appears certain, ask privately, what do I know directly? What am I repeating? What evidence would change my mind? What cost is attached to disagreement? If the cost of questioning is immediate expulsion, the group may be demanding identity rather than truth. You do not have to become reflexively contrarian. Contrarianism is another form of crowd dependence. It lets the group determine your position by inversion. The goal is independent examination. Sometimes wisdom agrees with the majority. Sometimes it agrees with a minority. Assent should follow reasons, not the emotional reward of either conformity or rebellion. When a real decision cannot wait, there are moments when information is incomplete and delay is costly. In emergency medicine, leadership, parenting, or crisis, you may need to choose quickly. Use a compressed protocol. What is the immediate objective? What option protects life, integrity, or reversibility? What assumption would be most dangerous if wrong? Who has relevant competence? What will trigger reassessment? Quick assent should still include a revision point. Decide, act, observe, and update. The opposite of automatic assent is not endless hesitation. It is accountable decision. After the pressure passes, the mind often reviews a pressured event as though perfect calm should have been possible. It finds the sentence you should have said and the cue you should have noticed. This can produce useful learning or useless prosecution. Conduct an after-action review with 4 questions. What happened? What did I perceive? What did I assent to? What will I prepare next time? Do not ask, why am I like this? That question invites identity. Ask, which link in the sequence can be trained? Perhaps attention narrowed. Perhaps judgment became absolute. Perhaps the body needed a practiced exit sentence. Perhaps you required support sooner. Convert the event into design. Pressure reveals the current state of training. It does not issue the final verdict on your capacity. Chapter 9. Correct the inner measure with reality. The scale inside the mind. Assent depends on an inner measure. The mind weighs evidence, risk, value, and meaning. If the measure is poorly calibrated, a whisper can weigh more than a history, one failure more than years of competence, and one desire more than every consequence. This book uses the phrase inner measure for the standard by which impressions are evaluated. It is not presented as the historical name of a secret doctrine. It is a practical image that gathers the ancient work of attention, judgment, assent, and character into one question. What scale am I using? Some scales are inherited. Some are distorted by fear. Some were useful in a past environment but no longer fit the present. A child may learn that silence predicts danger and carry that measure into a safe relationship. A young worker may learn that exhaustion proves worth and use that measure long after survival requires it. The goal is not to destroy the scale. It is to calibrate it against reality. Facts before philosophy. When a theory about the mind becomes attractive, people can begin forcing every event to fit it. They interpret illness as wrong thinking, poverty as weak belief, abuse as unconscious attraction, or success as proof of moral superiority. This is not wisdom. It is a philosophy protecting itself from facts by blaming the person who suffers. The law of assent makes no such claim. Thoughts influence attention, emotion, behavior, relationships, and repeated choices. Those processes can affect trajectories. They do not create total control over external events. Other people have agency. Systems distribute opportunity unequally. Bodies carry vulnerabilities. Chance enters every life. A well-calibrated inner measure begins with facts before metaphysics. What happened? What evidence exists? What conditions contributed? What can be influenced? What cannot be honestly assigned to individual thought? This protects the law from becoming superstition. It also protects you from using spirituality as self-accusation, the camera, the witness, and the record. When an event is emotionally charged, gather 3 forms of evidence. The camera is what could have been observed or recorded: words, actions, dates, amounts, frequency, and sequence. The witness is your lived experience, how the event affected you, what you noticed in tone or pattern, and what your body registered. Subjective experience is not worthless because a camera cannot capture it. The record is the broader pattern across time. One apology may look sincere on camera. The record may show repeated harm followed by temporary remorse. One mistake may look serious. The record may show years of responsible behavior. Good judgment holds all 3. Pure objectivity can ignore lived context. Pure feeling can mistake activation for proof. A single event can hide the pattern. The inner measure becomes more trustworthy when the forms of evidence are compared rather than forced into one. Boundaries do not require a diagnosis. People often believe they must prove another person's motive before setting a boundary. They search for a label: narcissist, manipulator, avoidant, toxic, dangerous. A label seems to authorize action, but a boundary can be based on observable impact and repeated behavior. You do not need to know whether someone intended to exhaust you before limiting access. You do not need a complete psychological theory to say that insults will end the conversation. You do not need certainty about the future to protect money, privacy, time, or safety. This is calibrated assent. I may not know the motive. I know the pattern I will no longer participate in. The distinction reduces two risks. It prevents paralysis while you wait for impossible proof, and it prevents overconfidence about another person's inner world. A boundary is a decision about your participation, not a final diagnosis of their soul. Correction without collapse. Reality sometimes corrects you painfully. The plan was weaker than you believed. Your tone was harsher than you heard. You overestimated your preparation. You misread another person's interest. An uncalibrated measure responds in extremes. It denies the correction to protect identity or converts the correction into total collapse. The disciplined response is local and complete. Local means the judgment stays attached to the relevant behavior. Complete means you do not minimize the consequence. I interrupted repeatedly and made the conversation unsafe for honesty. That is local. It was not a big deal is incomplete. I ruin every relationship is global. Local responsibility creates repair. Global condemnation creates paralysis. The purpose of accurate assent is not comfort. It is contact with the part of reality from which better action can begin. Doubt as maintenance. A calibrated mind includes doubt, not as chronic indecision but as maintenance. The stronger your preference, the more useful it becomes to ask what you may be missing. If you desperately want a relationship to work, examine evidence you have been explaining away. If you urgently want to leave, examine whether a temporary state is being treated as the entire pattern. If you are certain of another person's guilt, identify what evidence would alter your conclusion. The question, "What would change my mind?" reveals whether you are evaluating or defending. If no possible evidence could matter, assent has become identity. Conviction is not the enemy. Conviction should be proportionate to evidence and open to correction when the evidence changes. The Council of Competence. Some impressions concern domains where private judgment is insufficient. A bodily symptom requires medical competence. A contract may require legal expertise. A financial decision may require qualified analysis. A trauma response may require therapeutic support. The ancient faculty of choice includes choosing whose knowledge to trust. Autonomy does not mean solitary certainty. Evaluate counsel by competence, access to relevant information, transparency about uncertainty, and freedom from obvious conflicts. A confident stranger with a platform may have less authority than a quiet professional who has examined the details. Seeking help is not surrendering the inner measure. It is supplying the measure with better weights. You remain responsible for questions, informed consent, second opinions where appropriate, and the final decisions that genuinely belong to you. But refusing expertise because you want total self-reliance can be another automatic assent, often to pride or fear. The standard of human variability. Not every strategy works equally for every nervous system. A breathing practice may calm one person and increase another's distress. Silence may create space for one person and trigger another's trauma. Cognitive reframing may help after activation falls, but feel invalidating during acute grief. Calibrated practice observes results. Does the method increase contact with reality, behavioral flexibility, and the capacity to act according to values? Or does it produce numbness, obsession, shame, or avoidance? The law remains a principle, not a rigid ritual. The form can change. One person writes, another walks. Another speaks to a therapist. Another uses prayer, structured problem-solving, or sensory grounding. The criterion is not loyalty to a technique. It is whether automatic assent is giving way to wiser participation. The measure of values. Evidence alone cannot choose every direction. Facts can tell you the likely consequences of two careers, but not which sacrifice expresses the life you want. They can reveal that a relationship is difficult, but values help determine what effort, loyalty, safety, and dignity require. Values are chosen qualities of action. Honesty, courage, care, justice, discipline, curiosity, service. They are not outcomes you can guarantee. Use values to calibrate assent by asking, which interpretation allows me to embody the quality I claim matters? The thought, avoid the conversation so they will not be upset, may conflict with honesty and respect. The thought, say everything brutally because truth matters, may use honesty to avoid care. Values must be held together, not weaponized one at a time. A strong inner measure weighs both truth and manner, both self-respect and relationship, both ambition and health. When your standard is crueler for you, many people use one measure for others and a harsher one for themselves. Another person's mistake is understandable, theirs is evidence of defect. Another person's rest is sensible, theirs is laziness. Another person's learning curve deserves patience, theirs is humiliation. This double standard often hides behind excellence, but cruelty does not improve calibration. It distorts evidence toward guilt and makes honest review threatening. Apply the respected friend test. If a capable person you loved presented the same facts, what would you say? Do not use this to excuse behavior. Use it to discover proportion. You might tell a friend you made a serious mistake. Repair it, change the system, and stop calling your entire life fraudulent. Offer yourself the same combination of accountability and future. Self-compassion is not a favorable verdict. It is a fair courtroom. When your standard is kinder for you, the opposite distortion also exists. Some people demand accountability from others while explaining away their own behavior. Their intentions become more important than impact. Their stress becomes permission. Their apology becomes a request to erase the record. Calibration requires symmetrical standards. If repeated lateness communicates disrespect when others do it, examine what yours communicates. If secrecy breaks trust when directed at you, do not rename yours privacy without careful distinction. Ask, would I accept this explanation from someone whose behavior affected me? If not, your inner measure may be protecting self-image rather than truth. Fairness includes you, but it does not exempt you. The difference between signal and story. Intuition is often described as knowledge without conscious reasoning. Sometimes it reflects rapid pattern recognition built from experience. Sometimes it reflects fear, bias, desire, or memory. The intensity of an intuition does not identify its source. Treat intuition as a signal worth investigating, not an infallible verdict. Ask what cues may have produced it. In high-stakes situations, seek corroboration. If safety is involved, you may act protectively before certainty while continuing to evaluate. This position respects both embodied intelligence and human error. It avoids the arrogance of dismissing every intuition and the danger of obeying every feeling called intuitive. The inner measure asks, what does this signal justify right now? Perhaps it justifies slowing down, asking another question, delaying commitment, or leaving a situation. It may not justify a complete story about motive, destiny, or character. Update without humiliation. To calibrate is to update. New information should change the judgment. Yet people resist updating because they confuse revision with defeat. Say instead, my previous conclusion was reasonable with the information I had, but it is no longer the best conclusion available. Or when necessary, I ignored evidence because I wanted another answer. I am correcting that now. Both statements preserve dignity through honesty. The first prevents unfair self-attack. The second prevents evasion. An intelligent mind is not one that never misjudges. It is one that reduces the time between evidence and revision. The declaration. The law of assent becomes real when it is stated as a responsibility rather than a wish. If this principle speaks to the way you want to live, write in the comments, I choose the measure that will govern my life. The declaration does not promise perfect control. It marks a transfer of authority. Attention will still be captured. Judgment will still make errors. Old impressions will still sound convincing, but the measure will no longer remain entirely invisible. You will know to ask who set the scale, what evidence it uses, what behavior it rewards, and what character it builds. Reality is not your enemy in this process. Reality is what corrects the measure. Facts keep freedom from becoming fantasy. Values keep facts from becoming directionless. Humility allows revision. Courage allows action. The calibrated mind does not believe whatever feels powerful. It gives power to what can survive contact with truth. Chapter 10. The Practice of Deliberate Assent. The ASSENT Protocol. Ideas become useful when they survive ordinary life. The following protocol is designed for moments in which an impression has begun to organize attention, emotion, or action. Its name is easy to remember because it describes the faculty being trained. A. Acknowledge the impression. S. Separate fact from addition. S. Study the judgment and its evidence. E. Examine the value and the cost. N. Name the deliberate response. T. Train it through action and review. The sequence can take 30 seconds or 30 minutes. A major decision may require days. Speed is adjusted to consequence. What remains constant is the refusal to let an appearance move directly into command without passing through examination. Acknowledge the impression. The first step is contact without surrender. Say, an impression has appeared that, and finish the sentence plainly. An impression has appeared that I am being excluded. An impression has appeared that I cannot recover from this mistake. An impression has appeared that I need to act before I lose the chance. Acknowledgement matters because denied impressions continue influencing behavior from outside awareness. If you insist that you do not care, you may still punish the person through distance. If you insist that you are not afraid, you may still avoid the opportunity. Naming brings the process into the territory of choice. Do not begin by deciding whether the impression is true. The first step is descriptive. You are recognizing the visitor at the gate. Then rate its intensity from 1 to 10. The number is not scientific. It guides method. At 3, you may proceed directly to examination. At 9, regulate the body and delay irreversible action before attempting subtle reasoning. Also ask where the impression is felt. Chest, jaw, stomach, shoulders, hands. This prevents the analysis from floating above physiology. Sometimes intensity falls when the body is supported. Sometimes it does not. Either way, you have a more complete map. Separate fact from addition. Write or state 4 lines. What happened? What I felt, what I concluded, what I predicted. Suppose a client has not replied after receiving your proposal. What happened? The proposal was sent Tuesday. No reply has arrived by Friday morning. What I felt? Anxiety and disappointment. What I concluded? They disliked the work and consider me unprofessional. What I predicted? They will choose someone else, and this will damage my business. Only the first line is currently verified. The other lines matter, but they have different status. The feeling is real as feeling. The conclusion is a hypothesis. The prediction is a possibility. Separation reduces false solidity. It also reveals the appropriate action. You may send a professional follow-up next week rather than rewriting your entire business strategy today. For complex situations, add a 5th line. What pattern exists? One delayed reply means little. Repeated avoidance after commitments may mean more. The record protects you from both overreaction and denial. Study the judgment and its evidence. Now place the judgment under examination. What evidence supports it? What evidence challenges it? What information is missing? What alternative explanation fits the known facts? What degree of confidence is justified? Do not use alternatives to force a comforting story. The client may indeed dislike the proposal. Alternatives remind you that the evidence has not yet established one conclusion. Examine the language. Does the judgment use permanence, totality, or mind reading? Does it convert an event into identity? Does it claim access to motive? Does it treat emotion as proof? Then trace the source. Is this judgment familiar from childhood, a previous relationship, a humiliating event, a cultural standard, or repeated media exposure? Origin does not automatically disprove a thought. It explains why some interpretations arrive with unusual force. Finally, ask what evidence would change the conclusion. If the answer is nothing, you are not investigating, you are defending an identity or fear. Examine the value and the cost. Every judgment invites a behavior and protects a value, even if clumsily. Ask, what is this impression trying to protect? It may be safety, belonging, dignity, certainty, competence, fairness, or control. Respect the value without automatically approving the method. Then calculate 2 costs. What is the cost of agreeing? What is the cost of not agreeing? If the impression says do not apply, rejection will be humiliating. Agreement protects immediate comfort but costs opportunity and courage. Non-agreement risks disappointment but preserves growth. If the impression says this person has repeatedly violated trust, agreement may cost closeness but protect safety. Non-agreement may preserve connection at the cost of continued harm. The protocol is not biased toward optimism or persistence. Sometimes deliberate assent means leaving, refusing, reporting, resting, or accepting loss. The standard is not whether the response feels positive. It is whether it is proportionate, reality-based, and aligned with values. Name the deliberate response. Turn examination into one sentence and one action. The sentence should acknowledge the relevant truth without granting excess authority. The outcome matters, but it has not been decided. The behavior was unacceptable, and I do not need certainty about motive to set a boundary. I made a serious mistake, and repair is more useful than self-condemnation. Fear is present, and the next step remains safe enough to take. The action should be concrete, proportionate, and preferably reversible when uncertainty is high. Send the follow-up. Ask the question. Leave the room. Schedule the appointment. Work for 20 minutes. Review the contract. Apologize without demanding forgiveness. Sleep before deciding. Avoid vague actions such as be more confident or stop overthinking. The governing faculty strengthens through observable behavior. Train through action and review. Complete the chosen action before reopening the philosophical debate, unless new information appears. This is crucial. The old impression often returns during action and asks for another hearing. You begin writing, and the mind says, "This will not be good enough." You do not need a second trial. The judgment was already examined. Continue for the agreed interval. After action, review results without demanding a perfect outcome. Did the behavior align with the chosen value? What did reality reveal? What should be updated? What did the old pattern do when it lost obedience? The review turns experience into training. It also prevents the practice from becoming rigid. If the action produced harm or ignored evidence, correct it. Deliberate assent includes the willingness to revise deliberate assent. The protocol in 30 seconds. When time is short, use 6 compressed questions. What appeared? What is the fact? What am I adding? What matters most here? What action is mine? When will I review? Example. A colleague sends a sharp message during a meeting. What appeared? They are trying to embarrass me. What is the fact? The wording was sharp and included other people. What am I adding? A definite motive and a prediction that my status is damaged. What matters? Accuracy, dignity, and a usable working relationship. What action is mine? Answer the factual point briefly and request a private conversation. When will I review? After the meeting with the full thread. 30 seconds does not guarantee the right answer. It prevents the first answer from becoming inevitable. The protocol after rejection. Rejection produces an impression with 2 layers, loss and identity. Acknowledge a no has arrived and it hurts. Separate. The person or institution declined a specific proposal, role, offer, or relationship. The conclusion that you are universally unwanted is added. Study. What reasons were given? What feedback is credible? What was outside your influence? Is this one event or a pattern that deserves skill development? Examine value and cost. You value belonging, progress, or contribution. Chasing a reversing verdict may cost dignity. Avoiding all future attempts may cost the life you want. Name. This door closed. My capacity and future are larger than this door. Train. Grieve without surveillance. Request specific feedback once if appropriate. Extract one lesson. Take the next application or social action after a defined recovery period. The aim is not to become unaffected by rejection. It is to prevent rejection from hiring itself as your biographer. The protocol after a mistake. Mistakes invite 2 false forms of assent: denial and total condemnation. Acknowledge the precise action. Do not soften the verb. Separate intention from impact. Intention matters for understanding, but impact matters for repair. Study the chain. What cue appeared? What judgment did you accept? What behavior followed? What system allowed the error? Examine the value. Perhaps competence, honesty, trust, or care was violated. Let the value define repair rather than letting shame define punishment. Name, I am responsible for this action and capable of building a stronger safeguard. Train through 4 actions. Disclose appropriately. repair the consequence, change the process, and review for repetition. Do not use self-forgiveness to cancel accountability. Do not use accountability to forbid a future. The most respectful response to a mistake is a system that makes the next right action more likely. The protocol in relationship conflict. Conflict compresses complexity into accusation. You never listen. You do not care. Everything depends on me. Acknowledge the impression without using it as the first sentence spoken aloud. Separate the observable behavior from motive. When I spoke about the decision, you checked your phone and changed the subject. That is more useful than you do not respect me. Study the pattern. Is this occasional, chronic, situational, reciprocal? What has already been communicated? What changed after previous conversations? Examine values and costs. Do you value connection, truth, safety, autonomy? What does silence cost? What does aggression cost? Name a request or boundary. I need 20 minutes of undivided attention tonight. If now does not work, choose a time by tomorrow. Or, I will not remain in a conversation with insults. We can continue when that stops. Train by keeping the statement concise. Do not bury the need beneath a history of every offense. Observe the response. Assent should update according to behavior, not promises alone. The protocol for compulsive checking. Checking often serves the judgment that uncertainty can be eliminated through one more look. Acknowledge, the urge to check has appeared. Separate, there is no new evidence. There is a bodily demand for relief. Study, what happened after the last 10 checks? Relief came briefly, then the urge returned. The method is not solving uncertainty, it is training dependence. Examine, you value safety or connection. Agreement costs attention and strengthens the cycle. Non-agreement costs temporary discomfort. Name, no new information is available, and checking is not the same as solving. Train, set the next legitimate check time. Place the device elsewhere. Begin a concrete task. Let the urge rise and change without obeying it. If checking is severe, consumes substantial time, or relates to obsessive-compulsive symptoms, professional treatment may be appropriate. A protocol should support care, not replace it. The protocol for a difficult decision. When two values conflict, no interpretation removes all pain. The mind may keep thinking because it is searching for an option without sacrifice. Acknowledge the true dilemma. Separate facts, forecasts, preferences, and fears. Study each option under 3 horizons: immediate, 1 year, and 5 years. Identify reversible and irreversible elements. Seek information from competent sources and people who are not rewarded by one answer. Examine which values each option serves and violates. Do not pretend one choice contains every good. Name a decision rule before emotion changes again. I will choose the option that protects health and integrity, even if it reduces status. Or I will choose the experiment that is reversible and yields the most information. Train by setting a decision date. Once the date arrives and the process is complete, choose. Accept the unchosen cost. Reopen only if material information changes. Some peace arrives not from certainty, but from knowing the decision was made by a process you respect. The protocol for public embarrassment. Embarrassment makes the imagined audience enormous. The mind assumes that everyone noticed, remembers, and has formed a lasting judgment. Acknowledge heat, shame, and the urge to disappear. Separate the visible event from the imagined consensus. Who was actually present? What did they observe? What evidence exists about their conclusions? Study whether repair is needed. Correct a factual error. Apologize for an inappropriate act. If the event was merely awkward, allow it to remain human. Examine the cost of over-repair. Excessive explanations can magnify the incident and teach the mind that ordinary imperfection is dangerous. Name, a visible mistake is uncomfortable, not an erasure of status. Train by returning to the room, task, or relationship without a campaign to control every impression. Dignity grows when you can remain present after the performance of perfection fails. The protocol for digital outrage. A post appears. It is offensive, alarming, or incomplete. The platform presents an immediate field for reaction. Acknowledge, outrage and urgency have appeared. Separate. What does the post actually show? Is it current? Is context missing? Is the source original? What claim is being inferred? Study before amplification. Search for primary evidence, full statements, dates, and corrections. Consider whether sharing will inform or merely recruit more unverified emotion. Examine value and cost. You may value justice and public accountability. Reacting falsely can damage those same values. Silence can also have a cost. The question is not whether to care. It is how to make care accurate. Name. I will not let speed choose the quality of my conviction. Train by delaying public response until verification. If action is warranted, make it specific. Contact, donate, report, document, or communicate with sources attached. Outrage without direction often enriches the system that provoked it. The 7-day gatekeeper practice. For 7 days, do not attempt to examine every thought. Choose one recurring class of impression. Rejection, inadequacy, urgency, conflict, comparison, or catastrophe. Day 1. Capture the exact language. Write the sentence as it appears, without correction. Day 2. Identify triggers. Record time, place, people, physical state, and digital context. Day 3. Separate the first appearance from the added story. Day 4. Identify the behavior the impression requests and the immediate relief it promises. Day 5. Write a calibrated response sentence and choose one alternative action. Day 6. Practice the alternative action once while allowing discomfort. Day 7. Review what changed in intensity, duration, evidence, and recovery. The week succeeds if the pattern becomes visible. Do not require its disappearance. Visibility is the beginning of choice. The 30-day calibration. For a deeper practice, divide 30 days into 5 phases. Days 1 through 6, observation. Record one significant impression each day. Use no affirmations. Learn the voice, timing, and bodily signature of the pattern. Days 7 through 12, separation. Write fact, feeling, judgment, prediction, and requested behavior. Notice where fusion is strongest. Days 13 through 18, evidence. Test confidence. Add omitted facts. Ask what would change your mind. Consult competent sources where the issue requires expertise. Days 19 through 24. Values. Identify what the old assent protects and what it costs. Choose one value-based action each day. Days 25 through 30. Pressure. Practice the compressed protocol in live moments. Review recovery rather than perfection. At the end, write 2 short records. The old contract. When this impression appeared, I used to agree that, and then I would. The new standard. When it appears now, I will examine and choose. This is not a ceremonial promise. It is a description of trained sequence. The morning preparation. Before the day begins, anticipate one impression likely to visit. The Stoics practiced forms of preparation not to poison the morning with fear, but to reduce surprise. Name the likely trigger. Name the sentence it usually produces. Name the value you want available. Name the first action. The meeting may include criticism. The old impression says I am being exposed. I want precision and courage available. My first action will be to ask for one specific example before responding. Preparation should take less than 2 minutes. If it becomes detailed rehearsal, stop. You are preparing the governing faculty, not scripting the world. The evening release. At night, review one automatic assent and one deliberate assent. For the automatic assent, state what you learned and what you will prepare. Do not retry the entire day. For the deliberate assent, acknowledge the action even if the outcome was disappointing. This builds evidence that character can operate without guaranteed reward. Then close with, the day has become fact. My judgment about it can still become wiser. Release does not mean forgetting responsibilities. Write tomorrow's action, then stop using thought as a substitute for time. When the protocol does not work, some moments will overwhelm the sequence. You will assent before noticing. You will send the message, avoid the task, or collapse into the old verdict. Do not turn the protocol into a new instrument of self-attack. Apply it to the failure itself. An impression has appeared that the practice is useless. The fact is that one moment exceeded current capacity. The added story is that no learning occurred. Evidence may show that you noticed sooner, repaired faster, or finally identified the trigger. Then adjust conditions, shorten the protocol, use a written card, ask for support, reduce exposure, address sleep. Seek treatment where symptoms are persistent or severe. A tool must serve the person, not demand that the person prove worthiness to the tool. The proof is behavioral. The final proof of deliberate assent is not the thought you can repeat. It is the behavior that becomes available. You can hear criticism without surrendering identity or rejecting information. You can feel desire without obeying its deadline. You can face uncertainty without converting it into catastrophe. You can take responsibility without demanding permanent shame. You can set a boundary without manufacturing hatred to maintain it. These are not dramatic powers. They are forms of ordinary sovereignty. Use the protocol until the sequence becomes familiar. Appearance, examination, choice, action, review. The ancient law is no longer an idea at that point. It has become a practice of character. 15 impressions that commonly ask for authority. The following field notes translate the law into sentences that often pass unnoticed. Do not treat the responses as universal formulas. Use them as examples of calibration. 1. If they are disappointed, I did something wrong. Disappointment reports a gap between another person's hope and reality. It does not automatically report a moral failure. You may have broken a promise, in which case repair matters. You may also have made a legitimate decision they dislike. Ask what obligation actually existed. If you violated it, take responsibility. If you merely refused an expectation you never accepted, allow disappointment without purchasing relief through self-betrayal. Deliberate assent. Their feeling matters, and it does not decide the ethics of my choice by itself. 2. If I need help, I am not capable. Capability includes the ability to recognize limits, coordinate knowledge, and use support. The image of the completely self-sufficient person is not strength. It is a fantasy that hides the cooperative structure of human achievement. Ask whether help increases competence or replaces an action you can reasonably take. Request the specific support needed. Learn what can be learned. Give credit. Deliberate assent. Using appropriate support is part of responsible capacity. 3. If it feels wrong, it is wrong. New behavior often feels wrong because it violates familiarity. Setting a boundary may feel cruel. Resting may feel irresponsible. Receiving kindness may feel suspicious. The feeling deserves attention, but it may report novelty rather than moral error. Compare the feeling with evidence and values. If the action remains respectful and necessary, allow unfamiliar discomfort to accompany it. Deliberate assent. A feeling can be a signal without being a verdict. 4. I must be motivated before I begin. Motivation is a changing state, not a reliable permission system. Action can precede motivation by reducing ambiguity and creating evidence of movement. Choose the smallest honest beginning. Open the file, put on the shoes, write one sentence, make the first call. Do not demand enthusiasm. Demand only the agreed start. Deliberate assent. Readiness can grow after movement begins. 5. If I cannot do it perfectly, it will expose me. Perfectionism often protects identity by preventing completed evidence. An unfinished project can remain potentially brilliant. A finished project can be evaluated. Define the standard required by the actual task, not by shame. Separate errors that create real harm from imperfections that merely reveal humanity. Submit, learn, revise. Deliberate assent. Quality requires contact with reality, and reality can only respond to what I complete. 6. I have thought about it this long, so it must be important. Duration is not importance. Repetition may reflect uncertainty, emotional charge, habit, or the absence of an exit condition. Apply the output test. Has thought produced new evidence, a decision, or an action? If not, set a review point and redirect attention. Deliberate assent. Time spent thinking does not prove that more thinking is useful. 7. A good opportunity must be taken immediately. Some opportunities are time-sensitive. Others manufacture urgency to prevent examination. A legitimate offer can usually survive clear questions about cost, terms, reversibility, and fit. Ask what changes if you wait. Ask who benefits from the deadline. Consult relevant facts. If speed is genuinely required, decide through a compressed rule rather than excitement alone. Deliberate assent. Urgency is a condition to verify, not a command to obey. 8. If I forgive myself, I will repeat it. Permanent self-punishment does not guarantee moral growth. It can keep attention fixed on identity, while avoiding specific safeguards. Repair consequence. Understand the chain, change the system, and accept that remorse has completed its function when it has produced responsibility. Continued suffering is not payment to the past. Deliberate assent. Accountability is a practice, not an endless sentence. 9. If they misunderstand me, I must explain again. Clarification is useful when information is missing and the relationship can receive it. Repeated explanation becomes captivity when another person prefers the misunderstanding or demands that you argue for your own boundary. State the truth once with sufficient clarity. Answer sincere questions. Then let behavior carry what language cannot force. Deliberate assent. I am responsible for honest communication, not total control of interpretation. 10. The strongest emotion is the truest one. Intensity can come from current facts, old memory, bodily state, or accumulated stress. It tells you that something deserves attention. It does not specify what conclusion deserves belief. Delay irreversible action at high intensity. Name the emotion, identify the trigger, and examine the complete field when capacity returns. Deliberate assent. Intensity determines care, not certainty. 11. If I stop worrying, I will become careless. Worry imitates preparation by repeating risk without completing a plan. Care produces an action, resource, contingency, or accepted limit. Write the concern. Identify one reasonable preparation. Set the next review point. When the plan is complete, additional worry is not proof of love or responsibility. Deliberate assent. Care prepares. Worry keeps asking after preparation is finished. 12. Because it happened before, it will happen again. History changes probability, but it does not create certainty. Patterns should inform boundaries and preparation. They should not erase new evidence, changed conditions, or acquired skills. Ask what is genuinely similar and what is different. Identify the safeguard that did not exist before. If the pattern remains dangerous, act accordingly. If conditions changed, allow the present to present its own facts. Deliberate assent. The past is evidence, not prophecy. 13. If I am not chosen, I have no value here. Selection involves fit, timing, access, preference, competition, and sometimes bias. Value and selection overlap imperfectly. Examine feedback, improve the offering, and respect the consequences of not being chosen. But do not outsource the total measure of your work to a gatekeeper with limited information and particular needs. Deliberate assent. Selection is information about this decision, not the final measure of my worth. 14. If I change my mind, I was weak. Changing under pressure without reason can reflect weak standards. Changing because evidence changed reflects intellectual strength. State what you previously believed, what new information arrived, and why revision better serves truth or values. Do not protect consistency at the cost of accuracy. Deliberate assent. Integrity means loyalty to the best available truth, not to every former opinion. 15. This thought keeps returning, so I have not healed. Recurrence does not prove failure. Memory, stress, cues, and habit can reactivate old content. Healing may appear as a different relationship to recurrence, less belief, less obedience, faster recovery, greater compassion. Ask what the returning thought can still make you do. If its behavioral authority has decreased, progress is present even when the voice remains familiar. Deliberate assent. A returning impression is another opportunity to practice the new standard. The protocol card. Reduce the entire chapter to a card you can remember. An impression has appeared. The verified fact is, the story I am adding is, the value at stake is, the action I choose is, I will review when. Keep the card visible during the first month. The mind under pressure does not need a lecture. It needs a doorway back to sequence. When the governing center returns to you, the quiet transfer of authority. There may be no dramatic moment when the governing center returns. No final thought announces that you are free. Authority transfers quietly. You notice an accusation forming and ask for evidence. You feel the urge to explain and choose one clear sentence. You hear a catastrophic prediction and make a practical plan without giving the prediction the rest of the day. The old impression still arrives, but it no longer finds the same automatic signature. This is how the law changes a life, not by eliminating mental weather, but by changing who holds the instruments. At first, deliberate assent feels slower than reaction. Eventually, some forms of wisdom become fast. The pause is remembered. The boundary sentence is available. The distinction between fact and forecast appears almost at once. Training gives clarity its own familiarity. You were never the first voice. One of the most liberating discoveries is that you were never required to be the first voice in the mind. The first voice may belong to conditioning, biology, culture, memory, or the emotional state of the hour. Your deeper agency appears in the relationship you establish with that voice. This prevents two forms of shame. You do not have to blame yourself for every spontaneous thought. You also do not have to pretend spontaneous thought has no influence. It matters because it can capture attention and recruit behavior. Responsibility begins where capacity for relationship begins. Some days that capacity will be wide, other days it will be narrow. Use what is available. A 10-second pause is still a form of government. Asking someone safe to help you examine a judgment is still a form of government. Leaving a dangerous environment before attempting reflection is still a form of government. The freedom to be corrected. People often imagine freedom as the power to resist influence. A deeper freedom is the ability to be corrected without being destroyed. If identity depends on being right, every new fact feels hostile. Assent becomes defensive. The mind edits evidence to preserve the self. But when worth is not placed on trial by every error, truth can enter with less violence. Say, I want the judgment that matches reality more than I want the comfort of my current position. This is not submission to every critic. It is allegiance to correction itself. The governing center is strongest when it can change, because it chooses truth, not because pressure forced a performance of agreement. The freedom to remain uncertain. Uncertainty once felt like an empty room you had to escape. Now it can become a place where action is guided by values instead of guarantees. You do not know whether the work will succeed, but you know what quality you will bring. You do not know whether someone will understand, but you know how honestly you will speak. You do not know how long grief will remain, but you know you will not turn its presence into evidence that life has ended. Certainty is not always available. Orientation is. The ancient law gives orientation. Receive impressions. Examine judgments. Choose assent proportionately. Act according to character and revise when reality speaks. The freedom to feel without obeying. Emotions recover their dignity when they are no longer forced to govern. Anger can inform without becoming cruelty. Fear can warn without becoming prophecy. Grief can testify to love without becoming a ban on future joy. Desire can energize without setting every deadline. This is not emotional control in the mechanical sense. It is emotional citizenship. Each state has a voice, none holds absolute office. When a feeling is permitted but not obeyed automatically, you can listen more honestly. You no longer need to suppress anger because you trust yourself not to let it choose violence. You no longer need to deny fear because you know action can coexist with it. The governing center makes feeling safer by making action more deliberate. The freedom to leave a thought unfinished. The mind likes complete cases. It wants to know exactly why the person changed, what the future will bring, how others remember the event, and whether the choice was perfect. Some questions cannot be completed because the evidence is private, future, or non-existent. You can close participation without closing the mystery. I do not know why they chose it. I know what the behavior requires from me. I do not know whether the decision was optimal. I know it was made honestly with the information available. I do not know whether fear will return. I know it does not receive automatic command. An unfinished thought is not an unfinished life. The freedom to disappoint without betraying. Some of the oldest automatic assents concern belonging. You learned that another person's disappointment meant danger, withdrawal, or loss of love. The adult mind may understand that disagreement is survivable while the body continues treating it as exile. The practice is not to become indifferent. It is to distinguish betrayal from disappointment. Betrayal violates an honest commitment. Disappointment may simply mean that two legitimate desires cannot both be fulfilled. You can listen, care, and remain with your decision. The other person is allowed an emotional process. You are allowed an ethical boundary. Love that requires automatic assent is not dialogue, it is rule. The freedom to succeed without sending a message. Unexamined assent can turn ambition into a letter addressed to the past. You pursue achievement to prove a critic wrong, make a former partner regret leaving, or show a family that you mattered. The goal may produce energy, but the imagined audience remains the owner of its meaning. Task: if they never knew about this success, would I still want the life required to create it? If the answer is no, the goal may be organized around reaction. If the answer is yes, release the audience and keep the work. Success becomes freer when it is allowed to serve craft, contribution, stability, curiosity, or joy, rather than functioning as evidence in an old trial. The freedom to fail without becoming failure. Failure is an event in relation to an aim. It reveals that a method, preparation level, timing, or fit did not produce the intended result. It may be expensive. It may alter opportunity. It may hurt other people and require repair. But failure does not arrive carrying a complete identity. The mind adds that document. Use failure for the information it can provide. What assumption broke? What competence was missing? What risk was underestimated? What should be stopped, continued, or redesigned? Then refuse the vanity hidden in permanent condemnation. To declare yourself essentially a failure is to claim knowledge of every future action. You do not possess that knowledge. The freedom to rest before collapse. The impression I have not done enough to rest is often supported by a measure that has no upper limit. There is always another task, message, improvement, or person in need. If rest requires completion, it will arrive only when the body forces it. Calibrate rest by function, not guilt. What level of recovery allows sound judgment, health, and sustainable contribution? What signs show that capacity is declining? What obligations are real, and which are generated by fear of being considered insufficient? Rest is not assent to laziness. It can be assent to the conditions under which your governing faculty remains available. The freedom to act before confidence. Confidence is often evidence collected after action. Waiting for it beforehand creates a circular prison. You need confidence to act, but action is what would build confidence. Replace the confidence requirement with a safety and values test. Is the next step reasonably safe? Does it serve something important? Is the cost reversible or acceptable? If yes, allow uncertainty to accompany movement. You may speak while your voice shakes, publish while doubt remains, or ask while rejection is possible. The action does not prove the fear foolish. It proves fear was not the only authority present. The freedom to change slowly. Urgency can capture personal growth. Once you recognize a pattern, the impression says it must disappear immediately. Every recurrence then feels like disobedience or failure. But a response rehearsed for years has multiple supports: bodily expectation, social environment, memory, relief, and identity. Insight removes invisibility. It does not instantly remove momentum. Measure change by direction, frequency, intensity, duration, and recovery. Is the pattern occurring less often? Is it believed less completely? Does it last less time? Are consequences repaired sooner? These are real forms of movement. Slow change is not false change. It is often change occurring at the speed of honest integration. The freedom to move quickly when truth is clear. Patience can also become avoidance. Some situations have been examined repeatedly. The evidence is sufficient. The boundary has been crossed. The plan is ready. Yet the mind requests another round because action carries grief. Deliberate assent should not become endless deliberation. Ask, what new information am I genuinely waiting for? If no answer exists, the delay may be an attempt to avoid the cost of a clear choice. Once truth is sufficiently clear, speed can be honorable. Leave, report, begin, disclose, stop, or commit. The gatekeeper does not keep every visitor waiting forever. The freedom to use anger and release it. Anger can lend energy to a boundary that fear avoided. Use that energy to identify the violation, protect what matters, and take proportionate action. Then let the boundary, record, or consequence carry the work. If anger must remain intense for the boundary to survive, the boundary may not yet be structurally supported. Write it. Enforce it. Change access. Seek help. Build the external condition that does not depend on daily emotional fuel. You do not owe permanent rage to the truth. Facts remain facts after the body stops burning. The freedom to grieve without explaining. Grief produces questions because the mind wants a structure large enough to contain absence. Some questions bring meaning. Others imply that loss can be solved if the correct interpretation is found. Not every pain is a judgment error. Some pain is the appropriate cost of attachment. Deliberate assent here may mean agreeing that grief deserves time while refusing conclusions that make life guilty for continuing. You can say, "I miss what cannot return. I do not need to make the love a mistake or the future a betrayal." The governing center does not command grief to leave. It protects grief from becoming the only law remaining. The freedom to receive joy without suspicion. After instability, joy may trigger vigilance. The mind says, "Do not relax. Something will take this away." The warning pretends to reduce future pain by reducing present contact. Loss is possible. That is not evidence against receiving what is here. In fact, impermanence can deepen attention without demanding anxiety. Fastened to the accurate sentence, "This moment is good and not guaranteed." Both halves are true. The first permits gratitude. The second prevents possession from becoming fantasy. The law is not only for refusing dark thoughts, it also helps you refuse the judgment that safety requires, withholding yourself from joy. The freedom to be ordinary. Some impressions demand exceptional identity. You must be the wisest person in the room, the strongest in the family, the most productive in the group, or the one who never needs help. Ordinary limitation then feels like disappearance. Examine the contract. Who requires this performance? What would remain if you were competent without being superior, loved without being indispensable, and meaningful without being famous? Ordinariness is not mediocrity. It is release from using comparison as proof of existence. You can pursue excellence because the work deserves care, not because another person's lesser position is required for your worth. The freedom to be seen learning. Learning requires visible incompleteness. Questions expose what you do not know. Practice exposes awkwardness. Feedback exposes distance between intention and effect. The impression says, wait until you can appear naturally talented. But hidden practice often becomes delayed life. Choose environments where mistakes are survivable and instruction is credible. Ask the basic question. Attempt the skill. Let the identity of the beginner be temporary and honorable. Assent to learning means accepting evidence of current limitation without treating it as evidence of final capacity. The freedom to start performing healing. Once people learn psychological language, they may begin performing the image of someone healed. They speak of boundaries while avoiding intimacy, acceptance while suppressing anger, detachment while secretly monitoring, and forgiveness while remaining organized around the offense. The governing center requires no audience. Admit the actual state. I understand the principle and still feel captured. That sentence is more useful than a polished declaration that behavior contradicts. Healing becomes credible when life no longer needs to demonstrate it. The measure is quieter, less compulsion, clearer action, more honest contact, faster repair. The freedom to let another person be wrong. An inaccurate judgment about you can feel like a theft. You want to enter the other person's mind, correct the record, and remain until they agree. Clarify where consequences make clarification useful. Protect your reputation where work, safety, or justice requires it, but recognize the boundary of influence. Some minds are committed to a version of you that serves their story. Assent to this limit. I can present truth and evidence. I cannot force a private verdict. The energy recovered from impossible correction can return to conduct that creates a stronger record over time. The freedom to let yourself have been wrong. The mirror image is equally important. You may have judged someone unfairly, believed a rumor, defended a weak position, or remained certain after evidence shifted. Do not protect the old assent because apology feels humiliating. State the correction directly. Name the consequence. Avoid explaining so much that responsibility disappears. I formed a conclusion without enough evidence. I treated you according to it. I was wrong and I am sorry. The governing center returns when truth becomes more important than the image of never needing correction. The freedom to choose a smaller life for a larger value. The culture of expansion teaches that more opportunity, income, visibility, speed, and reach must always be better. An impression of scarcity then appears whenever you consider limits. But a smaller schedule may protect health. A smaller audience may permit depth. A smaller home may reduce financial pressure. A narrower commitment may allow integrity. This is not an argument against ambition. It is an argument for measuring size by the value served. Growth that destroys the governing conditions of your life may be expansion in numbers and contraction in freedom. The freedom to want more without despising now. Desire and gratitude are often presented as opposites. They are not. You can recognize that a condition is insufficient while refusing to make the present self contemptible. The impression I must hate where I am to leave it recruits shame as fuel. Shame burns hot and unreliably. A steadier assent is, this life contains value and this area requires change. Improvement becomes less frantic when it is not an escape from unworthiness. You can build toward more while remaining in respectful relationship with the person doing the building. The freedom to say, I do not know. The words I do not know can feel like loss of status. So the mind fills gaps with confident stories. This is especially dangerous when others depend on your judgment. Accurate uncertainty is a form of competence. Say what is known, what is unknown, what is being done to learn, and when an update will occur. I do not know the cause yet. Here are the two leading possibilities, the evidence we need and the decision we can safely make meanwhile. That sentence protects trust better than certainty that later collapses. The freedom to know enough. The opposite trap is infinite research. The mind keeps gathering because no amount of information can remove the emotional risk of choosing. Define the decision threshold in advance. What facts are essential? What uncertainty is unavoidable? What deadline protects opportunity? What source quality is required? When the threshold is met, decide. More information may produce diminishing returns while increasing confusion. Wisdom includes recognizing when inquiry has completed its function. The freedom to protect attention from borrowed emergencies. Other people can present their urgency as your obligation. A late request arrives with pressure. A conflict you did not create demands immediate mediation. A platform announces another crisis every hour. Ask, is this urgent, important, mine, and actionable? The four answers may differ. Something can be important without requiring your immediate involvement. Something can be urgent to another person because they delayed. Protecting attention is not selfish when it preserves the capacity to serve real commitments. An undirected life becomes available to whoever shouts next. The freedom to have a private standard. Public approval is unstable because audiences change. A private standard is the set of qualities you intend to embody, whether or not they are rewarded immediately. Define it behaviorally. I verify before sharing. I keep promises or renegotiate them early. I do not use private information as a weapon. I speak directly where directness is safe. I repair errors without theatrical shame. The standard should be demanding enough to guide and humane enough to survive reality. Review it when evidence and maturity change. A private standard is not secrecy. It is an inner measure that does not wait for applause. The freedom to stop measuring every day. Self-observation can become another captivity. You monitor whether you are calmer, healed, disciplined, focused, or spiritually advanced. Every fluctuation receives a score. Practice days without evaluation. Live the standard and let evidence accumulate. A seed does not improve because it is unearthed every evening for inspection. Review at useful intervals. After the action, at the end of the week, or when a pattern materially changes. The governing center is not a surveillance state. It exists to direct life, not replace life with permanent self-analysis. The ancient law in a modern morning. You wake and reach for the phone. An alarming headline appears. A message remains unanswered. Someone else's achievement flashes across the screen. Before your feet touch the floor, 3 impressions request authority: danger, rejection, and inadequacy. The law does not require a perfect ritual. It requires recognition. Place the phone down. Feel the room. State the facts. Choose the first commitment of the day before the feed chooses it for you. Drink water, open the curtain, write the sentence, walk, pray, prepare, begin. The ancient gate is still present inside a modern morning. 10 tests of mature assent. Understanding the law intellectually is the beginning. Maturity appears when the principle is tested against competing values, incomplete evidence, and emotional cost. The following tests can be used as a final audit of any important judgment. The fact test. Can you state what happened without assigning motive, identity, or destiny? If the answer is no, the event and the story are still fused. Reduce the sentence until it describes observable behavior, available records, and direct experience. Then, place interpretations beside it rather than inside it. This test does not ask you to ignore context. It asks you to know where context ends and inference begins. A clean fact is not the whole truth, but it is a stable beginning. Mature assent can say, "These are the facts I possess, this is the pattern I perceive, and this is the degree of confidence I can justify." The proportion test. Does the psychological weight of the judgment match the scale of the evidence? One error should not weigh as much as a life. One compliment should not establish invincibility. One warning should not be ignored because the rest of the record is good, nor should it erase the rest of the record automatically. Proportion includes frequency, severity, duration, and consequence. A rare minor mistake differs from a repeated breach of trust. A temporary mood differs from a sustained condition requiring care. Mature assent does not make everything small. It makes each thing its actual size. The reversibility test. When evidence is incomplete, does the response preserve the ability to update? A reversible action gathers information without creating unnecessary permanent cost. You can ask, pause, test, negotiate, create limited distance, or run a small experiment before making a total commitment. Some situations require decisive, irreversible action, especially when safety or integrity is at stake. But many impressions demand permanence simply because emotion wants relief. Mature assent asks, what is the smallest action that protects what matters while allowing reality to teach me more? The dignity test. Does the judgment permit you and the other person to remain human? Dignity does not mean equal access, reconciliation, or absence of consequence. You can end contact, report misconduct, pursue justice, or refuse trust while declining dehumanization. When a judgment requires you to see yourself as worthless or another person as less than human, it often prepares behavior that will violate your own standard. Mature assent protects boundaries without requiring hatred as proof of seriousness. The agency test. Does the judgment identify an action that actually belongs to you? Statements such as, "They must understand the past must be different," or "I must know the future," assign your will to inaccessible territory. They create labor without an object. Translate the demand into agency. You can communicate, repair, prepare, request, refuse, leave, document, grieve, or accept uncertainty. You cannot force another mind, revise history, or command chance. Mature assent locates the next action where your hands can reach it. The time test. Would the same judgment deserve confidence after sleep, food, distance, and the arrival of tomorrow's information? Some truths remain clear across states. Others dissolve when exhaustion, adrenaline, loneliness, or intoxication passes. Whenever consequence permits, let an important judgment meet more than one version of your nervous system. This is not a reason to distrust every strong feeling. It is a reason to distinguish enduring evidence from temporary amplification. Mature assent respects timing as part of intelligence. The audience test. Would you choose the same response if no one knew you had chosen it? The imagined audience can turn decisions into performances. You forgive to appear evolved, retaliate to appear strong, overwork to appear essential, or remain in pain to prove loyalty. Remove the audience mentally. What action serves truth, safety, repair, and the life you must actually inhabit. Mature assent is capable of choosing a quiet good that cannot be displayed. The future character test. If you renew this judgment for 1 year, what quality will it train? The impression may solve the immediate discomfort while creating a future pattern. Avoidance brings relief and trains fear. Honest conversation brings discomfort and trains courage. Compulsive defense brings temporary vindication and trains dependence on external verdicts. Do not ask only what the judgment makes you feel today. Ask what kind of responder it makes easier to become tomorrow. Mature assent considers character as a long consequence. The compassion test. Can the judgment remain accurate without becoming needlessly cruel? Cruelty is sometimes mistaken for seriousness, yet an insult to the self does not add evidence. It often reduces the ability to repair by making contact with the mistake intolerable. Compassion is not the removal of standards. It is the removal of unnecessary contempt. The same applies to others. Understanding conditions can improve judgment without cancelling responsibility. Mature assent joins clarity with the amount of mercy that truth permits. The revision test. What evidence would make you update? State it before the next event. If the person behaves consistently for 6 months, trust may increase. If the symptom changes, medical guidance may change. If the strategy fails after a defined trial, the plan will be revised. A revision condition prevents both premature abandonment and endless loyalty. It turns assent into a living judgment, rather than an identity oath. Mature assent knows what would justify a new answer. The integrated verdict. After the 10 tests form an integrated verdict with 5 parts. What I know is, what I do not know is, what matters is, what I will do is, what would make me revise is. This verdict can guide a relationship, a career decision, a health concern, a creative risk, or a private fear. It is strong because it does not pretend to know more than it knows. It is flexible because revision has been included. It is practical because it ends in action. Most automatic impressions cannot survive this level of structure unchanged. Some become smaller, some become more serious. Some reveal that you already knew what action was required, but were waiting for a feeling of certainty. The purpose of the tests is not to make every decision slow. It is to train the measure until good questions become quick. A life organized by chosen agreements. Imagine the practical difference after 1 year of using this discipline. You still encounter criticism, but you no longer accept humiliation as the price of learning. You still face uncertainty, but checking no longer occupies every gap. You still make mistakes, but repair begins before shame finishes writing its indictment. You still feel anger, but boundaries no longer depend on rage. You still desire success, but the work is less controlled by an invisible audience. The external life may change because behavior changes. Clearer communication can improve relationships. Better risk judgment can improve decisions. Sustained action can build skill. Boundaries can reduce exposure to harm, yet no outcome is guaranteed, and that is part of the law's honesty. The deepest change is that your inner agreements become visible enough to be chosen. Life is no longer organized entirely by the fastest interpretation. The measure you carry into every room. You carry an inner measure into meetings, relationships, solitude, and ambition. It determines what counts as threat, success, insult, evidence, enough, and failure. Other people will try to place their weights upon it. Advertising will, family history will, fear will, desire will, even philosophy will. Do not seek a scale untouched by influence. Seek one that can identify influence, compare it with reality, and revise deliberately. The measure is not made sovereign by refusing the world. It becomes trustworthy by staying in disciplined contact with the world. Facts calibrate it. Values orient it. Compassion keeps it human. Action tests it. Revision keeps it honest. 7 ordinary moments of deliberate assent. The law becomes easiest to remember when placed inside an ordinary week. These moments are not heroic. That is precisely why they matter. Monday, the unanswered message. At 9 in the morning, you send a message that matters. By noon, there is no answer. The impression appears. The silence is intentional. Attention returns to the screen. Judgment adds disrespect. Assent requests a second message with a sharper tone. You stop at the gate. The fact is simple. 3 hours have passed. The motive is unknown. You notice that silence activates an older fear of becoming unimportant. The value is clear communication, not forced reassurance. You set a reasonable follow-up time and place the phone away for 1 work interval. The mind returns twice. Each return becomes practice. At 4, the reply arrives with an ordinary explanation. The lesson is not that silence always means nothing. The lesson is that one afternoon did not need to be governed by a motive the evidence had not supplied. Tuesday, the critical remark. During a meeting, someone says your proposal lacks clarity. The body heats. The impression says they are exposing you in front of everyone. The old response would be a long defense. You ask, which section felt unclear? The person identifies a transition and a missing number. The criticism becomes specific enough to use. You still dislike the delivery. Later, you decide to address that privately. 2 truths remain together. The proposal needed improvement, and the public tone was unhelpful. Automatic assent wanted total guilt or total innocence. Deliberate assent extracted correction without surrendering dignity. Wednesday, the comparison. You see someone announce a milestone you have wanted for years. Envy arrives with shame. The impression says, their progress proves your delay. You name the feeling without moral prosecution. Envy reveals desire and perceived scarcity. The fact is that another person reached a visible milestone. Their path does not contain enough information to measure yours. You ask what the comparison can teach. Perhaps the goal still matters. Perhaps your current strategy has been inconsistent. You choose one action connected to the desire and close the platform. The emotion becomes information rather than identity. You neither attack their success nor pretend not to care. Thursday, the family expectation. A relative asks you to accept another responsibility. The impression says, if you refuse, you are selfish. Your body remembers years in which belonging depended on usefulness. You examine the obligation. The need is real, but your capacity is limited. Agreeing would produce immediate approval and later resentment. Refusing everything would ignore a relationship you value. You offer a defined form of help within a clear limit. The relative remains disappointed. The old system calls that disappointment failure. You let the feeling exist without renegotiating against yourself. Care was expressed, capacity was respected. Disappointment did not become the measure of morality. Friday, the exhausted verdict. At the end of the week, a small task goes badly. The impression says, you are losing your ability. The sentence feels true because exhaustion has made every difficulty heavier. You postpone identity. Food, rest, and mourning become part of the evidence-gathering process. The next day, the task is still imperfect, but the catastrophe has disappeared. You identify one technical problem and correct it. The law did not tell you to ignore the error. It told you not to let an exhausted nervous system write the broadest possible meaning. Saturday, the tempting offer. An offer appears with a deadline, social proof, and the promise of transformation. Desire says this is the chance you have been waiting for. Fear adds, if you wait, someone else will take your place. You inspect total cost, terms, evidence, and the seller's incentive. You ask whether the opportunity serves the plan you already chose or merely interrupts it with excitement. The deadline turns out to be recurring. You decline. The next morning, relief replaces urgency. Sometimes deliberate assent leads to action. Sometimes its clearest expression is money, time, and attention that remain unspent. Sunday, the review without trial. You review the week and notice that you still reacted automatically several times. The final impression says, a disciplined person would have done better. You refuse to turn reflection into prosecution. On Monday, you delayed the second message. On Tuesday, you asked for specificity. On Thursday, you held a limit while feeling guilt. These are not perfect victories. They are behavioral evidence. You choose one pattern for the next week and one support for it. Then you stop reviewing. The week belongs to fact now. The purpose of memory is to improve tomorrow's measure, not to keep yesterday in court. The ordinary shape of sovereignty. This is what sovereignty looks like before it becomes a philosophy. A few minutes not surrendered to checking, one question asked before defense, one boundary that survives disappointment, one purchase delayed, one mistake kept at its actual size. No single moment appears large enough to transform identity. Together they create a new record. The mind begins to learn that uncertainty can be survived, criticism can be examined, desire can wait, and emotion can move without carrying the body into every requested action. The ancient law is used whenever one ordinary moment no longer receives an automatic yes. The freedom to pause before saying yes. Many lives are not governed by dramatic mistakes, but by small agreements made too quickly. You accept the extra task, the invitation, the expense, the emotional burden, or the deadline before consulting the life that must contain it. The first relief comes from avoiding the discomfort of refusal. The later cost appears in exhaustion and resentment. Create a respectful pause sentence. Let me check what I have already committed to, and I will answer tomorrow. A pause is not manipulation. It is the time required for consent to become informed. During the pause, examine capacity, total cost, hidden expectations, and what must be displaced if you agree. Every yes spends time that cannot be spent again. Every no protects something, though not always something worthy. The inner measure decides which cost serves the life you intend. If pressure increases when you request time, treat that pressure as information. A healthy request can usually tolerate your need to consider it. When genuine urgency exists, ask for the exact deadline and the consequence of waiting. Deliberate assent makes generosity cleaner. When you say yes after examination, you can participate without secretly charging the other person for a sacrifice they did not know you resented. When you say no, you protect the truth of future agreements. What only a few people learn. Few people learn to use this law not because it is hidden behind an institution, but because it asks for a form of power less glamorous than control of the world. It asks you to notice before reacting, to question a thought that sounds like your own voice, to accept facts that injure pride, to leave uncertainty unresolved, to repeat a chosen action without immediate reward, to refuse both helplessness and fantasy. This power rarely looks impressive from the outside. It looks like the message not sent, the evidence checked, the apology made, the boundary kept, the task begun, and the story no longer repeated. The last impression. As you finish this book, a final impression may appear. I understand the principle now. I should never react automatically again. Do not assent to that demand. You are a living system, not a completed statue. Impressions will outrun awareness. Old judgments will sometimes receive the signature before you see the document. The law is practiced in return. When you notice, return to the fact. When you exaggerate, restore scale. When you avoid, choose one step. When you cause harm, repair. When you need help, ask. When uncertainty remains, carry it without making it king. The goal is not a mind in which nothing unwanted appears. The goal is a life in which appearance and authority are no longer the same event. The gate is here. The next thought will arrive in its own time. Perhaps it will be useful. Perhaps it will be an old fear wearing today's clothing. Perhaps it will be a true correction you would rather avoid. You do not need to know in advance. You need the gate. An impression appears, attention notices, judgment is examined, assent is given, withheld, or revised. Action follows character. Repetition strengthens the standard. This is the ancient mental law in its complete form, not a promise that thought commands the universe, but a discipline through which thought stops commanding you without examination. The world will continue presenting impressions. Other people will continue forming judgments. The future will continue withholding guarantees, but within that movement, a governing center can remain available. The first voice need not be final.